Good, how's it going?
All right.
I was thinking, so I was thinking about this 6%.
Well, it'll be interesting. I mean, did you look at the previous slides that we sent out? It'll be interesting. Because you probably didn't hear it after we yelled out last night.
Right?
Oh, wait, yeah, you're right, you're right here.
Okay, so I can just.
But
Even when
in the
you
last budget meeting,
you were all the way up,
that
if you can look
Thursday,
up
I
there, you
went
can.
on, I said,
Okay,
I said
good.
3% probably, but
Okay, good, I'll just do a little hand modeling.
Perfect. I can't see myself on camera. Not my thing.
We're gonna go in 6 cents. And
When I used to work at Sacramento PD, they
we
used to
were
try to get
allocating
me,
all the.
because we were kind of, my office was coordinated with the public information officer.
So that means. that,
You do it, you like the camera, go ahead, please.
You'll like it. Like it looks better coming from a sworn person anyways, in my
People
opinion.
say. change
From sworn.
Oh,
Yeah.
And I actually
Like
painted
there's
it.
just something about it, I think it looks better.
And he said, yeah, let's get together. and make her. I mean, in the very least. Well. I don't know whether I would or not. But I want to see what they're gonna say here, and then I want to figure out where some of the other cuts are.
Just like,
There were a couple of things that we're done with this one.
I'm good.
Peachy. We'll go with peachy.
So I hate to ask you this because I'm not like in the meeting. Do you guys have a bottle of water or something? For
I'll
the
check.
audience, just for this one audience member.
Whitney very nicely asked me if I wanted one, and I said no, so I'm sure.
Okay, okay, good. Thank you, I'm really. I reached down from sisters as quick as it could. So it's not to miss.
I've been, I dropped my trailer off in Prineville.
Okay,
I have
And,
a Sprite that's cold, or I can get you a glass of water.
the Sprite is fine, thank you,
Okay.
so appreciate it.
And had to pick up a part for my dishwasher just down the road, and I was like, well, it'd be just as easy for me to, okay, how do I say that?
I have to go to Prineville on Thursday.
You can pick up my trailer from it.
Okay, will do. Lunch meeting there. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I just picked up the top, I tried to jostle it, so.
Can I
That's just in
shake
case.
it and
That's
open
just in
it
case.
towards Jim?
As long as I behave, right?
Yes.
Hi, Robert.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Even if I have my phone turned on silent, it didn't, since like possessed, so.
Put it in the sink and run water over it.
Okay. Good advice.
Yeah, Phil was telling, or actually Phil mentioned that when we at the joint Somerville Pine Chamber meeting.
Oh, okay.
I don't know whether
She talked to me about it. There's another meeting on the way out the door, and I'm like, I don't know. Probably not if I still get it from the Christmas tree.
I mean, it's your question, or easier way to do it is just ask Robert. So, when you say allocate all unallocated TRT to, building funds, do you mean including the stuff that normally is allocated elsewhere, like the sheriff's office and some of the other requests that are coming in?
Keeping those commitments, it's, you know, the
Request.
new. Yeah.
Well,
Because-
Sherry Hill was telling me about the 2 million.
Yep.
But can't she get that from the Christmas tree though at the statewide level since?
I mean, if you can get it anywhere, I mean, that's.
That's Kotek's #1 priority. I just thought, because she talked to me about, it, I'm like, I don't know, unallocated TRT is like, I'm taking it.
And that is a big, I mean, just personally, that's just a big number.
Didn't she
Yeah.
want to?
How are you doing? Hi, how are you guys? Good to see you both. You're here for the big financial. I was gonna say, we weren't doing the early budget committee work yet,
Yeah,
but
no, we're just here for being flies on the wall.
there you
Which is
go.
good.
Yeah. With so much information, last year was my first year, so.
Yeah.
Holy cow. I better get my S together on this.
And there's a lot, the whole agenda is all finance.
I see that.
Perfect way to, you know, just sitting through the other topics. That's why I figured I'd shout that one.
Yeah, how long
Stay here to-
Pretty much all of this is interesting.
I'm just here for your thing, and the first thing, and then I'll bug it out, I'll be back for the financial overview at the end. Well,
Once a year.
I wrote the thing in case.
Apparently it's a great job
We
today. I remember I wore a great t-shirt.
We now have a quorum of our six.
We do, we're ready to vote.
Oh my God, yeah,
Yeah,
let's
but you said it
vote.
wasn't a budget meeting.
Right,
Say, no, we already did
Agenda item,
that.
that's right.
Oh,
Good to see
yeah,
you.
thanks for all that.
Good to see you.
No,
You.
good to see you.
Yeah.
So you said- Hi, how are you?
Yeah, it's, just takes a while to fix it out.
So it was
18 and 19.
Yeah, right. Okay, I got it. Good.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Right, it doesn't show any.
Hey, hello.
No,
I need to apply for something.
he wants to incorporate brothers.
Yeah.
He also just, he also just should be on
Yeah.
Don't be
Oh, what's wrong
sewage
with
out on
that?
the grounds.
Oh, yeah, yeah, well, anyway, okay.
Right.
And then back, we need to make Is there anything we can add to that story?
No, I think it's all accurate.
Okay, all right.
We agree with all of it. I see Janice.
Right, and Janice will be there, and I did, I printed out Brad's letter from us to.
Our feeling is we
Depends on
should
the,
decide
because
this.
he normally allocated
And you know, I have a meeting on
that
Friday.
he had been getting one, and then the last.
That's right, I go with that, but I see how the
So I don't know what you're
Oh, I can
assuming,
see
or more importantly, what he's assuming when it comes into the budget.
Well, and that's. Well, we're those. Perfect. Good. But I didn't see all four.
Okay.
Just making sure.
Terrible. Oh, she would say it was fabulous.
It's,
No, she's pregnant.
Oh.
I'm like, no, I mean, I was
It may just take a minute, yeah. Summer versus.
Hey, Tom,
Hey, thanks for joining us.
Good to see
Today's number is
Yes.
Wanted to be
I
good
know.
touch.
We're trying to make the two lines not cross, that's the plan, right? I got it.
So
Hey, Tony.
then Judy's on with me on Friday. and we're
Let's
gonna-
make it cross.
There's a lot of ideas.
Yeah.
Coordinated,
yeah.
So I
Third member. I'm fine, I know that. I don't get that. We'll see. We might be able to watch out.
Yeah, she was at the groundbreaking.
Yeah, that,
Yes, she's like, we've got.
Oh, yeah.
She goes,
Yeah, last time we
Well, we're back to kind of 2019.
that's a reality.
It's,
Oh, it's all the echoes of all the crazy.
And
Everything's off.
and I'm certain we'll see.
I was thinking about that, when I was in 2029.
So That's coming in.
Yeah, and it's like, we're making decisions. That's what we just gotta be real.
How you doing?
When you get those staffing levels
Alright.
up, because when it goes back up, then you have to rehire, retrain.
Hello?
Yeah, no, I printed it off.
At the kids' center.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. That's right. Oh my God, do you realize that our numbers are worse? Commissioner Chang, how are you? Our population is what it is. Yeah, our numbers are way worse. Yeah. I was-
Long-term
I was
for
like, okay,
financial
that would be
Well, that's why we're
great.
here. Do we need to break
There's
out, like,
support.
do we need to break out the whiskey or something?
Hammer out the numbers.
We're all meshed together.
Well, not exactly.
Do we have to get like COVID signs, t-shirts?
Okay, we can get started here. This is a Board of Commissioners meeting for 1 p.m. Monday, April 24th. It's Finance Day, Numbers Day today. Is there any citizen input? We have our Zoom system set up. A raised hand feature if there's anybody that wants to say anything. If not, item number 1, resolution establishing responsibility of county treasurer.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. For you is resolution number 2023-020, and it's a resolution to establish responsibilities of the county treasurer and to designate the primary and secondary investment officers. This is come about obviously because our treasurer and our CFO are 2 different people for the first time in a long while, and it's the issues come up as to what the various roles are. The treasurer, the CFO, and the county administrator, I know have met a number of times. I've been involved in at least one of those meetings, and I believe David Gibbons has also been in the meetings and also reviewed the list, which is attached as Exhibit A to the resolution. So at this time, staff was hoping that the board would be amenable to adopting the resolution and creating this written record, if you will, of the various responsibilities of the county treasurer.
Kind of like the job description, but division of duties also, just making sure it's real clear, is my understanding.
Yeah, state statute's a little draconian. And, you know, when the same person holds both offices, you don't have to dive into it and really concern yourself. But now that we have it, the situation we have now with 2 different people, it necessitated getting some clarity on this for the benefit of everybody.
We've done a kind of, on the other side, do we essentially have a more bounded CFO position description as well now?
I don't know that the CFO description's been altered by that. I have to turn to Robert.
I don't remember how these things were packaged originally. Was there both before?
Historically, I suspect at some point in the past, there was some description for the treasurer, but I don't believe it's been around for a long time. I'm certainly not aware of it. I haven't seen it, if it existed. Eric's been here the longest. Tony, I don't know, one of you might remember it.
Yeah, I don't remember a job description for it. As you mentioned, it was kind of one and the same.
Yeah, this probably goes back, 20, 30, 40 years since we've really had to analyze something like this.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm asking is, did we pull this stuff out of a combined job description?
The majority of this comes from the state statutes and trying to go in there and glean what ORS specifically assigns to the treasurer. There aren't ORS provisions that speak to the CFO. So, but there are state statutes and even state constitution provisions that speak to treasurer. And so the goal was to go in and pull those out. I think working logistically and operationally with what Robert and his team do already to try to find a list and an identification of the various job functions that made the most sense while still being consistent with state statute. And so this is a joint product of those meetings. Bill and Robert are both here, and I'm sure they can both speak to it if the board would like. Like I say, David Gibbons, I know, has put eyes on these and is comfortable with this as well, following the audit that he had done of the treasurer responsibilities as well. So.
Yeah, so setting up a real business-like atmosphere.
Yeah, and this was, to provide some level of formality, and so it's a little more than something written on the back of a cocktail napkin. Not that those aren't bad, I settled many
How things get
cases
started.
in the day that way, but I think we probably wanted something a little more than that, so that's what this is about. And and obviously, if we get back to a point in time where these offices are held by the same person, this will probably kind of go on the shelf somewhere and draw dust until we have a situation again when they're held by two different positions.
Well, it helps to understand what hat you're wearing. Right now we do have both these positions, and this will really help to find a job. As we start off, item number 1, responsibilities for investment. So this is the definition, kind of creating the definition of a primary and secondary investment officer. I know we just kind of digested that concept. That is the primary. You think of it as the pool of funds and investments done by the treasurer. But so we're defining a secondary investment officer, just picking up if needed or needed. So, because that's probably not done. I mean, I don't know if anybody's ever done that, or.
Yeah, I don't know that statute
Terminology,
speaks
yeah.
to it directly, but I'm familiar with one other county right now that's going through the throes of this, which is Polk County over in the valley, and they haven't gotten to this point.
I
Hopefully
bet they'll use this as input.
Hopefully this might be a guide for them, but they haven't worked nearly as cooperatively as Deschutes County and Bill and Robert and Nick have. It's been very much a collegial cooperative process to come up with what works, what makes sense, and what's consistent with the mandates in state statute.
Were there
Yeah,
not?
if I might add too, I mean, that really was the focus of a lot of our internal discussion, is let's figure it out, do it in a collaborative method, and also trying to be as efficient as possible. Recognizing we have 2 people now, 2 different jobs, but we definitely need to work together. Yeah.
I'm sure glad you were a banker.
I had a lot of experience doing
Good
this.
credentials.
So the question I was about to ask was, are there not other counties that have separate treasurers and CFOs whose product we could look at as part of this process as well?
I'm not sure. I'm not aware of any additional ones presently other than Polk County.
I thought David Gibbons found a couple.
Yeah, I don't.
Hi, Robert Tittle, CFO. I'll just add in, there are a number of counties that do, a number of them that can have separate CFOs and treasurers, but each county is unique in how it's also set up. And some have departments, some don't have finance departments, some may have a separate treasurer's office, but so it's really looking at the unique setup of each county as well when they have 2 or 1. And just one other comment to answer your previous question is, some of our policies even state, it'll say that CFO/treasurer or treasurer CFO. So this is and/or, sometimes it uses the term and/or CFO treasurer, recognizing sometimes it could be the same person, sometimes separate. So this, again, to the point, just kind of formalizes who's the primary and secondary, and really on all the responsibilities, we work collaboratively on these issues, whether it's with finance, whether it's with IT, on the PCI compliance or merchant services, but it's really working hand in hand, still together.
I should have indicated my comments are responsive to general law counties. So Benton County, for instance, is a home rule county. So they operate quite differently than we do. So this is a general law county. The only other one I'm aware of is Polk County that's going through this very issue as we speak.
Yamhill County, for example, has a separate treasurer and finance manager, they call it. Their treasurer just does investments. They have a certain dollar amount. They said your treasurer invests $20 million. And that's the basic role of their treasurer. So again, it's very unique for each county and depending on what other systems and structures are set up.
So then down under responsible for general banking service relationships, act as chief liaison between county and general banking service providers. So do you think that is the kind of the lead for the outreach to the banking partners, being the treasurer's position? Because I know that the CFO probably has the daily connections with all the banks. So, just kind of thinking through that. So, just the responsible for treasurer position, act as chief liaison between county and general banking service providers. So kind of the front end of that is the treasurer then?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Again, working collaboratively and understanding Robert and his role with the finance side of the house. I think having someone that's able and willing to take the lead in some of these discussions, but also not doing anything in a vacuum, I think is really important. And that's really our focus going forward.
And then I know that over the years, sometimes we kind of look at our banking services, like, I don't know if it's an RFP or just, the relationships there, yeah, so then that would be led by the treasurer position in partnership with everybody.
Yep, absolutely. And some of these roles are accounting manager or new title controller. Our controller also works a lot with our banking relationships, so we'll be working with now the treasurer on some of those items as well.
Well, this is on the same team here for sure.
Yep.
So Bill, I haven't had much chance to ask you how it's been going and what you've been up to. I mean, I assume that this list of responsibilities that you are actively engaged in all these things already.
Yeah, and understanding the direction that we were going, and certainly Robert and his team have been very accommodating, understanding of that, and we've kind of identified opportunities as they've come up to get me involved and engaged. So I don't have any complaints there in terms of I think it's worked pretty well. But again, recognizing that we've got an established system in place, that we don't necessarily want to do things that create an additional layer of activity or management that doesn't support the overall needs of the county. And I think that's really the focus here.
Any other questions?
No questions, but I did notice that you are to actively attend community events. And I thought you were already doing that, so yes. But I highlighted that because I thought.
It's a big part of who I am and what I've done. 30 years here in Central Oregon.
Well, I just think it's really important as our treasurer.
It is.
You're
That
out
community
there.
outreach piece is really important, and I do believe as an elected official, we need to be out and available in the public.
So I want to thank you for that.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Just kind of thinking ahead and trying to get a sense of how long this responsibilities document might be very important and essential for what is the time frame? What is the time frame till the point where we need to decide whether essentially we want the CFO and the treasurer to merge again? If there is a minimum amount of time that is required before someone is even eligible to be the treasurer.
Which is a residency
And
requirement.
then there's kind of the interaction with election cycles as well. So I mean, how long is this, at minimum, how long is this good for?
Well, the residency requirement is, my recollection is a year that for instance, for the CFO, in this case, Robert, he'd have to have residency of a year at the time of the election. Or it could be at the time you put in for it, I forget which, we can find that out from Steve. I believe it's at the time of the date of the election. As far as the election cycle goes, if there was a vacancy in the treasurer's position and it's on the front end of if it's the first half of the 4-year term, then there'd be an election held. If it's on the back half of that 4-year term, then the Board of Commissioners would appoint that person to fill out the remainder of that vacancy.
And if I could add to that, I thought it was really important that we actually have a clearly defined treasurer responsibilities to go into the future. I mean, nobody can tell, what this might happen again, a similar situation. And I think having that clearly defined and, to be able to support the roles and responsibilities of the position, I think is really important. So.
Yeah, no, and I mean, if when the roles merge again, this provides provides a good basis for the elected officials compensation committee to kind of assess, essentially what you would add to the CFOs. Yeah, that's right, I should be looking back there. What you should add to the CFO's salary in order to adequately account for the services.
Is there a motion?
So moved that approval and board signature of resolution number 2023-020 to establish the responsibilities of the county treasurer.
Second.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Dare?
Yes.
Commissioner Chang?
Yes.
And Chair votes yes.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Whitney will just provide a clarification regarding your question that the Commissioner asked about the job description.
We'll have HR take a look at the CFO position description and see if there are any modifications that might be needed. We did an initial review and I've asked Kathleen to follow up with that. There might be 1 or 2 minor tweaks, but it doesn't appear to be major changes at this point.
Good. Item number 2, treasurer report. Welcome.
Perfect timing. Good
Should we sign
afternoon,
the
Commissioners.
resolution first, though?
What's that?
Should we sign the resolution
I
first?
Cal,
No, we'll get to it.
I'll pause for a minute.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, Bill Coon, County Treasurer with responsibilities.
Well defined.
Yeah, well defined. There we go. Very pleased to present the March Treasurer's Report here. And first, I'd like to provide a high-level overview of economic conditions that have occurred over the last 30 days. Not quite as dramatic as what occurred in March, with the economic conditions being somewhat calm during the month of April. Recognized immediate action by the FDIC to address concerns regarding access and safety of banking deposits. We talked about a lot last month. Seems the markets have moved on to other issues. And not all politicians are convinced that that all of these issues are behind us, and there is a push for additional legislative action. Wouldn't be surprised to see additional financial oversight of the banking industry, but that remains to be seen. And there is some concern about future problems with other financial institutions. So just recognize that we've kind of moved on to other issues, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised to see some other noise out there in that arena. From a short-term rate perspective, I think it's interesting to note that the St. Louis Fed chairman has reported that the Fed has significant more work to do in terms of taming inflation, despite recent market turmoil, indicated support for several more short-term rate hikes before potential softening towards the end of the year. So I think there's still open debate regarding what the Fed's going to do at their May meeting. I think right now, probably the consensus is another 25 basis point increase, but I think a lot's gonna be told here over the next several weeks in terms of other economic news that comes to the forefront. The labor market still seems very strong, especially with the announcement that we added another 236,000 jobs last month, which exceeded forecasts. And however, the tech sector continues to announce large-scale layoffs to right-size operations to meet current economic expectations. So there's kind of a yin and a yang going on there right now. We're adding jobs, but we're also subtracting in some really key industries. As predicted, the Fed announced its short-term benchmark rate increased by 25 basis points when they met in mid-March. And again, there is sentiment that we're still seeing additional rate increases before we start to back off on rates. I think the next major issue that we're dealing with right now, and this is really coming to the forefront right now, is what appears to be a very highly partisan debate over increasing the debt ceiling, and starting to see an impact on rates right now. I think the U.S. Treasury hit the current $31.4 trillion limit in January, and essentially has been using extraordinary measures since then to cover their obligations. Without an increase in the debt ceiling, the federal government will not be able to raise more debt. And this could happen as early as June or as late as September. And that's going to have a significant impact on financial markets. So I think that's really the big issue that we're faced with right now. What we're already seeing in the financial markets is a profound impact on short-term rates, with most investors considering the 1-month T-bill to be a safe haven during this debate. And the yield, just for I guess comparative purposes, the yield on the 1 month T-bill has dropped from a high of 4.675 at the end of March to a low of 3.31% today. Significant decrease, and that's really due to economic uncertainty. So I think that is kind of the broad context that I think we're looking at in economic markets right now. Debt ceiling debate is absolutely paramount that we get that resolved. I don't know, I think we all remember back in, 2011, when the federal government actually had a reduction in the risk rating as a result of an extended debate over the debt ceiling. So
impacting rates in this debt ceiling situation, it means lower rates generally? Is that pushing rates down?
It's a flight to safety, but it's really a flight to safety on the very shortest end of the yield curve because of the uncertainty regarding longer term rates. So I think it's, for lack of a better way to put it, investors are parking money in a short-term instrument while they wait for more clarity on longer term rates. And I think from Deschutes County standpoint, our goal right now is to continue to build funds in the LGIP pool, which is a secure overnight investment fund. And it gives us maximum flexibility in terms of determining what direction rates go longer term. So I think that strategy is still sound. There's a lot of volatility and longer term rate instruments right now. And I think it's a good, safe place to be until we have further clarity.
We're kind of halfway through the November inrush of money, so this is, and this will all happen between now and.
It absolutely,
it has to be resolved.
it has to be
before November,
resolved.
yeah.
It absolutely has to be resolved, and obviously the sooner the better. But we have a window where the federal government will literally run out of funding, and how they're able to basically stretch the available funding that they have. And that's where it's anywhere from mid-June to mid-September is that critical period of time where we need to have clarity on raising the debt ceiling, or it's going to have significant and profound impacts. So I think, again, a lot of conflicting economic data. March retail sales increased 0.3% month over month on broad gains across a number of sectors. March CPI numbers actually decreased by 0.1% month over month, with food and energy leading the way. And that now equates to a 5% annualized rate in terms of core CPI. Supporting the softening, March producer production inflation actually decreased 1% month over month, and that's measuring inflation at the production level, so manufacturing level. But again, there's just a lot of conflicting data out there, and I think that's adding to some of the economic uncertainty. March housing starts actually fell 0.8% in March, which follows a gain last month. So again, we're kind of, being whipsawed back and forth with some of the economic data available. Multi-unit housing activity continues to dominate new construction, as these units make up 57% of the total construction pipeline. And this is exactly what we're seeing in Central Oregon right now, with a number of large-scale new apartment complexes either under construction or being planned. Many of these are for market rate housing. For instance, I attended a meeting a couple of weeks ago updating the Bend Central Core Development Strategy. And during this meeting, one of the developers for the new Timber Yard multi-unit development, which is on the site of the old Corbine sawmill just up from the old mill district next to the parkway. During this meeting, a developer announced that this project will include 1,200 new market rate apartments, 250 senior apartments, 110,000 feet of commercial office space, 70,000 feet of retail space. And this project is being driven and managed by a nationally publicly traded development firm. When completed, they're estimating that this project could exceed $500 million in capital investment. So significant, large-scale project. But again, a large number of new market rate apartments coming online. And whether or not that's meeting the needs of the community right now will remain to be seen. But at a regional level, the March Beacon report, which shows Tri-County real estate activity, Ben's area median price now 685,000, which was up slightly from last month, but still lower than the peak of 773,000, which we experienced in March of 2022. Median price is up in spite of fewer higher end $1 million plus home sales. So that's really kind of the nature of our affordable housing right now, is embedded within those sales. And well over half of those sales last month were cash transactions, as opposed to transactions that required financing. Redmond isn't too far off either. Their median sales price is $439,000, which was flat from the prior month, but down from $542,000 in August of last year. And what we're seeing is and I think we're seeing this with community development, but housing permits have dropped off pretty significantly over the last several months in Deschutes County. And a lot of this is obviously driven by a long-term rate environment, elevated mortgage rates, which is having an impact on housing starts and home sales. So, given a still tight labor market, Fed has made it quite clear that with a mandate of full employment having been met according to their standards, really the goal is reinstating price stability despite already increasing short-term rates 450 basis points since this tightening first started last spring, which is a significant rate increase basically over a year. So there's still compelling evidence that the fight to curtail inflation will be more drawn out than first expected. But I think all market experts predict that we're approaching the peak in the rate cycle right now, just a matter of when that's going to happen. So that's it for my economic update. Any questions on that? If not, I'll dive into the March Treasurer's report. For the month of March, our portfolio balance stood at 301 million month end, which was a decrease of almost 18 million over prior month, but an increase of 23 million over a year ago. So again, we're starting to work our totals down, which is part of the seasonal cash flow that we go through. Net investment earnings were 553,000 for the month, which was slightly higher than February, but significantly higher than a year ago, 433,000. And again, this is reflective of a higher rate environment and also growth in the portfolio. So we've got higher investment balances, which are generating a higher rate of return overall. All portfolio category balances are well within policy guidelines. And as reported last month, the LGIP rate has remained flat at 3.75%. I really don't expect any changes either upwards or downwards over the next 30 days on that. I think probably the next point where they might consider a rate adjustment would be when the Fed meets in May. But who knows on that?
What day in May, Phil, are they meeting?
What's that?
What's the date they're gonna meet in May?
Oh,
Do you remember?
I don't
Because our
have.
revenue forecast is supposed to come out like May 19th for the state.
Yeah, it's mid-May. I don't have that exact date in front of me here, but I'll get back to you on that date.
Okay.
Yeah. Average portfolio yield was 2.20%, which is slightly lower than the 2.28% yield that we generated in February. But again, we are calculating that yield now on a weighted average basis, which is a more appropriate calculation. We made that change last month. The portfolio has a weighted average time to maturity of 1.27 years, which is the same as in the prior month. And I really believe that this is kind of the sweet spot where we need to be right now until we have a little bit more rate certainty. And then we can start making a more educated guess on longer term rates. And then finally, we're still building short-term funding in our LGIP fund to take full advantage of what I believe to be acceptable short-term rates. And also that allows us to maintain maximum flexibility to provide funding as needed. So that's the end of my report. Do any of you have any questions?
But we could go up to, what is it, 54 million?
57 million.
57 million?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're down to 20, it's a little
We're
less than 21.
20, today it's 23 or 25 million, what I recall.
Okay.
Yeah, Robert, do you remember that number? I think it's in the OGIP fund.
Yeah, about 20.
Okay.
So,
On the room. So next
Great.
one is our LGIP.
yeah, May 3rd.
There you go. May 3rd.
Okay, and then we're gonna get the state numbers after that. And apparently there's $15 billion worth of requests on top of the money the state has for funding.
I don't doubt that.
Only 15 billion.
Yeah, with a B.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is finance report for March.
Good afternoon, Robert Tintel, Chief Financial Officer. And yeah, this is a great tag team. So, you know, present all the information. So today we're here to talk about the financial report as of March 31st, 2023. Again, this is the unaudited information. I do want to point out that I'll be speaking to some updated numbers today. And that's because as we are 3/4 of the year through our fiscal year, departments have a lot better idea where they're going to end up in this fiscal, at the end of the fiscal year. And also as departments have been working on their budgets, the next year's annual budget, they're doing a lot more thorough analysis of all of the funds. And so we have a little deeper dive. So we'll talk about some of the differences in the numbers and how it's going to impact the county overall thus far. So first in your packet, you should have the memo from me. I believe it's page 15 in your packet. First page is the dashboard for the general fund. Do want to highlight a few items on that. The revenue year to date in the general fund is $40 million or 91.8% of budget. That is a 2.5 million increase over last year, just so you know. Last month, we were projecting that. By comparison, last year, the revenue was 37.6 million and 92.2% higher. Expenses year to date are 32 million or 71.2% of budget. And by comparison, last year, expenses year to date were 30.7 million and 71% of budget. And yes, that is 1.6 million increase over last month when we were presenting that information. And the beginning fund balance is 13.8 million or 106% of the budgeted 12.9 million beginning fund balance. So the dashboard there. We'll go over the general fund in a little more detail. I want to point some of those items out to you in more detail. Next page, on page 16, is the position control summary. And essentially, and I forgot to bring my glasses today. But for the FTE stayed the same from last month. So there was no net increase in FTE, but there was a difference of plus 1.1 for community justice, but adult parole and probation went down by 1.1. So the net FTE stayed the same, although there were slight changes in between. Just a couple to highlight, the Sheriff's Office does have unfilled positions at 12.74%. They remain at 265 positions, but they increased 2 are unfilled, a change from last month. Health Services remain at 421.8 positions compared to last month, but they are at 10% unfilled, 10.46. And CDD, they're now at 64 positions at 5 unfilled, and that's at 15%. We go down to 911 at the bottom of that spreadsheet. Of their 60 positions, 7.91 still remains unfilled, and that's at about 14% there. So there has been some improvement overall. We're down to 8.9% overall in the county. There's still some departments that struggle with filling some of their positions. I mean, nationwide, people are struggling with filling jobs, even though there's vacancies there. But that's an overview of our filled positions and unfilled positions. So next I'll move to page 17 in your packet, which this is a overall, all departments, all funds combined into a high level. What are we looking like? So if we look at this first page on 17 in your packet, total resources of all funds, we are projecting in that last gray shaded column there, that will be at $352 million of total resources. So these are the funds coming in. I do want to note last month at this time, that number was 361 million. So it's a $9 million decrease. And that's what we'll talk about. That's to spark your interest on when we get to the individual funds. Why the difference? 7 million of that now is in Fund 274 Health Services. And the reason for that is because a lot of times throughout the year, we'll get money in, we'll get funds in from the state, and they'll record them as revenue. If those funds aren't, if they're not going to spend those funds and the expenditures occur in the next year, they'll actually move that revenue out of current year revenue and they'll move it forward for next year's revenue so that the revenues will match the expenditures. And this is common practice, what they've done, annually. Right now we're showing it now because now that they have a good idea of what revenue should they actually recognize at this point in time. So at the end of the year, they'll know. And we'll talk about health services a little bit more in the future, but I want to give you a heads up there.
So next year will be $7 million rosier.
So the ending fund balance now, well, this is revenues. We'll look at expenditures as well, but the revenues will be will not be recognized as beginning working capital at this point, but they'll recognize it as revenue next year. So their reports now in this budget and actual summary during the month will match the numbers that are in their budget that will be presented during the budget committee. As far as where do they expect to end this year? Because where you expect to end this year is your beginning working capital for fiscal year 24. So these numbers will be in alignment. So we'll get the full overview of all their resources and expenditures coming up as well. And so in this, the reason why the revenue went down as departments are really honing in on their adjustments. CDD reduced their revenues by 600,000, their estimates, and that makes sense as well with the decreased activity. And other, that's all these funds that other captures all the other funds that aren't labeled above. Combined, that's a 2.6 million throughout the various funds added up together. So again, resources went down to 352 million, and it was 361 last month. As we look at page 18, which is the total requirements, this is, we're expecting, again, the last column gray shaded is the projection at end the year at 411 million. Again, so resources of 352, expenditures of about 411 million. And it's similar to a number last year, so 412 million. So while the expenditures are on track to how we updated it last month, the revenues are where you'll see the differences. And that's again with revenue recognition of moving that forward into the next year. So when we get to the end, page 20 in your packet, which is the ending fund balance, again, all funds combined where we end up, we are still projecting to be in a better condition than what we budgeted. We budgeted the middle column there, 130 million would end up with fund balance. We're really projecting now 175 million. Again, it was 182 million fund balance last month when we were looking at it. But because of the reduced revenues that we're anticipating, that will roll forward into the future year. We're down to 175 million now. Page 21, we'll look at the general fund specifically. That's page 21 in your packet. Want to highlight the clerk's office here. That's the largest decrease in the general fund, discretionary general fund revenue source. Now projecting it to be $1 million under budget in revenue. from what we were originally expecting. Last month, they were only projecting 700,000 decrease in revenue, but as they have more numbers in, it's now projected to be at $1 million under from what we budgeted for the general fund. And that will come into play later when we're looking at the general fund forecast, how these even small differences, although $1 million is a large number, but small differences comparatively add up. As we go down to transfers, out, that's we are projecting 1.172 million over what we anticipated. It's a savings there, and that's due to the health services that we'll be giving back, returning $1 million that we previously given them, but they are returning that to the general fund because they didn't need it within this current fiscal year. So at the end of the fund balance, for this general fund, we are anticipating to end at 13.8 million this year, which is still 2.4 million higher than anticipated when we did the budget. One last thing to highlight, vacancy rates for the assessor's office was at 7.9%. Some of the other savings and requirements is due to vacancy savings as well. Going to move now to page 23 in your packet, which is the TRT funds, Fund 160, 170. And if you have any questions, just let me know. A difference here in our resources for room taxes, we are now looking at a decrease in our room tax now consecutively for the last 4 months. For the last months we haven't. Commissioner Adair, we're on page 23.
I do have a question about
Okay.
21, and of course I started coughing. You have the vacancy savings for the clerk's office of 127,000. I was looking at that, and then apparently they've already replaced that person, but it just didn't make sense to me. It seemed way too high for one person for, okay, so like 5 months. We had a vacancy, if you look at the chart.
Yeah, that the savings under the requirements, it does capture all of their expenditures, include M&S, including personnel costs. I think the comment is most of that would be attributed to personnel savings. It would be personnel and benefits at the 40 to 50% rate.
So you're saying 40%?
Yeah, we
We
have
back out, and that's gonna be their salary for 7 months?
typically a position is typically around 100,000 a year. I mean, at a minimum. I'd have to look at. I don't specifically know which position that is.
Okay, well,
on that.
it ends up
Yeah.
that it's really only, instead of 7 months, it's really only 5 months. Because they've
Yeah,
already
they
filled
did.
it.
They filled it right, as you saw just
Yeah.
last week.
So if they,
Yeah.
yeah,
And this is what they project their expenditures to be underspent by the end of the year from what they had budgeted. So they had budgeted 2.4 and they are anticipating they'll be at 2.3 by the end of the year, which is about $127,000 savings. Thank you. So page 23 on the TRT funds. Again, as I mentioned, the last 4 months, we have seen a decline in our TRT revenue. December was down 7.4% for the month. January was down 8.1, February down 7.9, and March down 8.8. Collectively, year to date, it's down 2.5%. We're still 2.5% over budget compared to where, let me start over on that because it is confusing. We're 2.5% over what we were last year. So even though the last 4 months have seen a decrease, we started the first of the year, the year-to-date increase was a lot higher, but these last 4 months have dropped us down to only 2.5% over last year. However, the key is last year when we budgeted TRT revenue, we were a little more generous than what we thought because we are 2% under budget. So even though year to date is 2.5% over last year, we are 2% under what we budgeted in the current year. That's why, to my point, room taxes under resources, you'll see that negative $520,000. We are anticipating by the end of the year, if these trends continue the last few months, we're going to be down under what we budgeted by about $500,000. So still at about $13 million, but under what we budgeted.
So this projection takes into account everything that's happened up till now. And then for these last couple months of the fiscal year, we are projecting.
Yes.
lower than what we had projected in the budget, or we're projecting what we had predicted in the budget?
We are projecting a slight decrease in these last few months as well. Yeah. Based on the trend on the last 4 months that have seen a reduction.
And that's where we get to 97%.
Yes. Yep. Under requirements, the item that changed here is the grants and contributions. We had budgeted 5.6 million. We're projecting 4.6. That $1 million is the Mount Bachelor payment that we're anticipating will happen in July. It won't happen in this fiscal year. We're anticipating it'll happen in July or later. It'll happen in next fiscal year. So as we're refining our projections, we're seeing a savings there. And so that will drop down into our total fund balance. But again, we've already committed to that. So that will come out of next fiscal year.
Have you had communications with Mount Bachelor about that project? I mean, it was a darling project of the recently departed president of Mount Bachelor. So I have a little bit, this is something I could be checking into as well, but I have a little bit of concern that, you know, if it was John McLeod's pet project, you know, who knows whether Powder Corporation is still really seriously committed to that project.
Yeah, I'll defer that question to anyone from admin if they have an update on that. I am not aware of an update on that.
Just yesterday, on Sunday, I signed a contract with the Oregon Department of Energy for the $1 million, where they're expecting to disperse the initial 300,000 fairly quickly, and then the balance 700,000 in the next fiscal year. So Judge Patterson has continued. Yeah.
They're the $1 million from the state.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So the fact that we continue to coordinate with Mount Bachelor on the project and Department of Energy, certainly all indications to me are that they're committed to the project and going forward.
That's good.
Last item on this page to highlight is under total fund balance in the projection column. Because of the updated revenue projections and the updated expenditures, we are anticipating $4.7 million to be remaining in this fund, any working capital at the end of the year. But as a reminder, even though we only have 4.7 million projected to be in the fund at the end of the year, we've already committed to $5 million. And that's $4 million to Sun River, 2 million over the next 2 fiscal years, and 1 million to Mount Bachelor, as just mentioned. So we're at a $300,000 deficit right now. So the first year, next year's CRT revenue, the first $300,000 will have to replenish the commitments we've already made.
But I want to point out that 73% of the room tax revenue for this year has been from Sun River. Just did that calculation the other day. So, and I know historically Sun River has contributed to the county's room tax revenue for decades.
Yep. Yep, and that's a great source of general funding that goes to the general supportive provision of government services as
And
well.
how appropriate that Sun River would walk in.
Sorry, it's like spirit, what did you do? I'm sorry.
So we have $5 million of commitments.
Yes.
For next fiscal year.
Right.
Those are $5 million of commitments for this fiscal year. That should be paid out of this fiscal year, or?
We have, out of the funds that we have on hand, and say it's 5 million, 3 million will be paid out next fiscal year because it's $2 million to Sun River and then 1 million to Mount Bachelor. And then 2 million will be paid in fiscal year 25, which is the last payment to Sun River of the $8 million commitment made to them, $4 million. Now,
It was actually
yes, $8 million.
$8
Yes, it was 4 million up front and then 2 million for the next 2 fiscal years. And so that will occur in 24 and 25, the $2 million payments. Okay, page 24 is ARPA Fund 200. And what we see here, I just want to highlight the interest on investments as we continue to gain interest there. So far, interest year to date What we received 21, 22, and 23 fiscal years is about 342,000 total, and that is discretionary funding. It hasn't been spent yet, has been allocated, but we just are keeping track of that because we will be able to utilize that at a point in time. This fund is anticipating that we will, at this point, it's $29 million projected to be recognized as revenue, but this is another case. Once we know as these projects come in the last couple months, at the end of the year, we'll only recognize the revenue for the expenditures that occurred, and we'll carry over revenue in the next year. So that as expenditures occur in the next years, we'll match the revenue and expenditures in those funds as well. And we are monitoring these funds, these projects to make sure they are spent, because as we know, all funds have to be obligated by December 31st, 2024, and then spent by December 31st, 2026. And if there are any projects that aren't going to move forward, we'll be looking at those. Those funds would come back, and then we'd come back to the board and say, now we have additional opportunity for those.
So Robert, I asked down today for the number of the ARPA funding. What is the balance not allocated? He said it was like 412,000, but that does not include then the interest income.
Correct.
Okay, so
Yep.
that's another, what, 342,000 on top?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, go to page 26, the sheriff's office. Item, and again, as they're looking at their projections, they're looking at their actuals as they're developing their budget. One of the biggest differences is in their requirements. Total year to date, their actuals is 41.5 million. It's kind of the gray shaded middle there. Last month, it was at 36.7. So they've, increased that a lot. These are actuals coming in there, but the total fund balance is down 5 million just from what it was last year, because their revenue stays about the same because most of the property taxes come in November. That's their revenue when they get most of their revenue, but their expenditures continue to increase. So now their total fund balance is went down 5 million over the last month. They're down to $23 million in actuals in the middle. But if you look at their projections, they're still projecting to end the year about the same at 8.8 million. Ending fund balance, which is about $1.5 million more than what they budgeted. But you'll see their expenditures these last few months continue to eat away at their revenue, again, because their revenue comes in November. Health services, page 27 in your packet, Fund 274. This is all their service. I'd like to say divisions, but they're called service elements, service districts, service areas, maybe it's service areas. Anyway, all of their areas combined in Fund 274. Their first line state grant revenue, this decreased by 4.6 million over last month. Again, because this is they're refining their revenues. What revenue shouldn't be recognized this year, they'll carry over into next year. And same with their state miscellaneous, that decreased from about $800,000 over last month. So their total revenue, they're still anticipating about close to budget, 97%. They're expecting to receive in total resources 56.2 million. Again, this is about 5.8 million decrease from last month. Their requirements also, they are projecting they're in the middle they'll be at 64 million, and that's a decrease from 2 million over last month. So they are refining that as well. Getting down to their total fund balance, they are expecting 11.6 million in their projection at the end of the year. And this is all fund combines, which for them combined, it's $3.6 million decrease over last month as they're refining their resources and their expenditures there. And now we'll look at a little more detail on some of their funds. Health Services Fund 274, page 28 in your packet. Not a lot difference there. The only thing is their revenues decreased by about 300,000 over last month. Their projection at 1.6. So that brings their total fund balance projection to 3.6. Again, that's a $300,000 decrease of where they were projecting last month. Page 29, Behavioral Health Fund 274. This is where the majority of the change has come into play. Their total resources now, they're projecting their end of year to be at 42.2 million. previously, this is where they were at $47 million. So the majority of the reduction is in the behavioral health services fund of 4.8 million. And their total requirements at 46 million was at 48, and this is where the 2 million decrease comes in as well. It's all within the behavioral health fund. So the ending result, total fund balance, their projection at $4 million, which is about 2.6 million less net than what they were last month projecting. Again, that revenue that comes in, it'll be revenue available, that'll be for next year, next fiscal year. Page 30, Fund 274, Public Health. Their revenues are slightly down by about $600,000. Their projection is now at 12.3 million, and their ending fund balance, total fund balance at the end, 3.8 million. Still 600,000, a significant number, but not much different from last month as well. Page 31 is Community Development, Fund 295. This also has seen a difference in their revenue forecast, resources forecast, in recent months. They're now projecting to be their revenue 9.5 million. Last month, they were projecting to be at 10.1 million. So at 87%. So we continue to decrease there, about $700,000 decrease from what they projected last month. And their expenditures, their total requirements, only a difference, they were similar to last month. They did decrease it by about $100,000, but they are expecting to be spending 9.4 million of their expenditures. So that brings us down to fund balance of 1.5, essentially 1.5 million they expect to have on hand, which is 92% of their budget. Last month, they were projecting at 99%. So they've refined this with their revenues and their expenditures, really looking at seeing where they'll end up at the end of the year. I think we're familiar with what's happening there. No change. I'll flip a couple pages, Fund 325 and 355. Really, there's not a lot of change from last month. Same with 465. So I'm going to skip a few.
I did have a question on 33.
Okay.
The personal savings there was like $831,000. Are they projecting into next year? Do you know now that they're going to be using fewer people there? What's really going on? The revenue is at 80%, so it's a touch over what, year to date. It just seemed like that was a pretty big number. It's, if the projection is 5 million and we have a variance of almost $1 million.
Yeah, it is their almost 14% vacancy rate that's attributed to that savings. They'll continue to budget their positions next year. The question will be if they will be able to fill them as well.
Part of it is they're anticipating future budget issues, and so they're holding positions vacant
Okay,
to help with that.
well, that's what I was hoping.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And that's what,
Thinking ahead.
even community development, even though they've reduced 8 positions,
Right.
right? They are still looking at their positions when a vacancy comes up. So the departments that know their funding is challenged, they're really taking a hard look at some of those things when vacancies come.
I know when you look at the difference of employees from a couple of years ago to today, we've added a lot of people during COVID.
Right. On the health department.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Fund 610, page 36, Solid Waste Fund 610. Okay. Their resources, from last month, they did make a change in their projections. They are now projecting their total resources will be 13.8 million, which is down about $340,000 from last month. Not huge for their fund, but still a decrease where they were projecting last month. On their transfers, they did reduce their projection in their transfers. It was $5.3 million, but you'll see the highlight there, Jay, that the contribution for their capital projects, it's reduced revenues and is to ensure adequate coverage for their fiscal year 24 requirements. Again, so as they're looking at budgeting for next fiscal year, they were thinking, well, how much can we transfer out of this year for next year? And they're like, let's reduce that. So in future years, they'll have that. So their total fund balance, though, they're projecting to be at 2.4 million. It's down about $800,000 from what they reported last month. But again, they accounted for that with their transfer, mostly in the transfer area.
Robert, when the landfill methane gas project comes online, the agreement that we're about to sign, there'll basically just be another line item under resources here. Is that where that's going to show up?
I don't know if it'll be a separate line item or if it'll be included in with one of the others, if it's considered what type of account it is. I can check on that to see. It just depends if it fits within a category of an account, we'll include it in there. But if it doesn't naturally fit, then we would create a separate stream for it.
They may be calling it royalties, which I don't see a royalty line on here, but
yeah,
I can't remember exactly what the terminology was.
Okay. And it could already be set up for fiscal year 24, but until we have actuals rolling into the reports. Okay, page 37, Fair and Expo, Fund 615. Food and beverage on their resources, just want to highlight that line. That actually went up $81,000 over last month. So they're projecting their year-end revenue a little bit higher than they reported last month. So that's a good sign there. And their total revenues of $2 million, 2.049. They increased up 81,000 over what they projected last month. So a good sign there. We have to share the good numbers as well as numbers that went down.
Well, I was there all weekend and yes.
You helped contributed to that cause, so thank you.
Yeah, no, it's amazing how many things are happening at the Fair and Expo, and it's unbelievable. Jeff has done such a great job and his team. So,
Absolutely.
Looking ahead to the item that we're going to be considering for the Fair and Expo master plan.
Okay.
I don't have a good sense of how much of each of these resources is flexible. But if their event revenue is basically coming in much better than anticipated, I mean, does that immediately translate to, oh, that funding could be available to do this master planning effort as well? Or
I would say, okay, go ahead. Yeah.
I think they have in 24 a large expense planned out of Fair and Expo Reserve, and so I think it has to do with the water system on property. And so I think Jeff's thought with the master planning effort was it's too much to spend down out of the reserve in this coming fiscal year to do both the water system improvement and the master planning effort. And so that's where that video lottery ask came from. There's some transfers out that occur from the main Fair and Expo fund and also from the 30% of the 1% of TRT that go to Fair and Expo Reserve, but it's being spent down. I think close to half of that fund balance is going to be spent down in 24 with about $1 million contribution to the water system fund replacement. So that's why we've teed up that master planning effort as a potential option for video lottery.
And I was going to say, a lot of that, as in enterprise funds, a lot of the funds are interchangeable, but sometimes when you have operating revenues, usually they're also used to support our operating expenditures. And we know they're master planning funds. The master plan is capital intensive. It needs lots of funds. And that's why there's also the transfer and a reserve, for them built up. Okay. There are requirements. They are projecting to be at 2.9 million for the year projected, and their total fund balance 754,000. Since their expenditures are increasing where they're projecting to be by end of year, their fund balance did go down by 161,000 where they projected, but they still expect to be 438,000 over where they budgeted for this year on the total fund balance.
Well, maybe looking for another FTE at some point. Kind of see that on the horizon. I don't know if that's coming.
There's multiple special requests for Fair and Expo. I think there's 3 or 4 in the fiscal 24 budget process as they kind of try to scale up for some of those larger events they're contracting.
Yeah, I'll never forget Jeff and his significant other working at one of the events last year. They were so short of help. Unbelievable. Everyone had to step up.
I'll look at page 41, the RV park, Fund 618. They did some, again, minor, but for the RV park, their revenues are anticipated to be 5,000 higher than what they reported last month, but their expenditures in this area, they're projecting the end of the year to be 43,000 down from what they reported last month. So overall, their fund balance at 100,000 is where they're anticipating to be. Last month, they only projected to be at 48,000. So for that fund, that's a good number, twice the amount of where they thought they'd end up. But it is only about 17,000 over where they budgeted, but still good news for the RV park. Not a lot of change on the next couple funds, 42, 43 page in your packet. So I'll go to page 44, which is the health benefits fund, 675. This is another fund that we'll talk about later in our other presentation today, but I'll highlight now, and Kathleen is in the audience as well if there are additional questions here. But this is another fund that we saw a trend, and we've been watching it, but for this month's projection, especially as we're preparing to do the budget for next year, took a harder look at it, looked at where we think we're going to end up this year. What's the trend for next year? What do we need to look at? So we updated these revenue and expenditure projections. So in total resources, talk about that first, they are anticipating to be at $24.5 million total funds coming in, which is 564,000 higher than where we were at last month, projecting to be there. But if we look at the requirements, the requirements are now projected to be at 30.097 on total expenditures. Last month, we were just reported, we thought we'd spend on budget at 26.7 million, but as the trends continue, the claims costs continuing in, we're now projecting 3.3 million higher than what we had budgeted for that area. So that is a significant increase. And again, we'll talk about that more in the presentation, but these are adjusted numbers. So the total fund balance will drop to $5.7 million is what the projection is. Last month, it was projected at 8.5. So this $2.7 million decrease in this month alone.
It's really shocking, isn't it?
It's
I
happening
mean,
fast.
No, I mean, remember we had like the 16 million there on the books and we kept wondering, and then it clearly was not last year when it went down as much as it did.
Yes.
What was it, like 8 million or something? That, yeah, this trend is continuing.
We had a very healthy reserve, and again, I don't want to steal the thunder of the presentation coming up later, but it was a healthy reserve.
I don't know if I call it steal the thunder, but it's
That's
definitely incredibly impactful, and it's,
absolutely.
yeah, it's going down.
Yep, and that'll be something we'll be monitoring very closely. So no change from 911 from what we reported last month. They're still within what they're projecting there. So that's at the end of the official financial report, the monthly financial reporting, and we'll talk high level on the general fund, health fund a little bit later today as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Our agenda, so now we're talking video lottery fund allocations. This is our annual review of what we think we're gonna do.
And then Brenda, oh, okay. I'm all set up to share now. So for the record, Stephanie Robinson, Administrative Services. And I'm here this afternoon to review anticipated revenue for the county's portion of video lottery proceeds and develop an expenditure plan for FY24. So as you are aware, video lottery proceeds have historically included funding for economic development activities, various projects, and support for other organizations, as well as the county's grant programs. So I can, well, in your packets, there were slides, requests from various organizations, and then a spreadsheet we can walk through. I was thinking I start with the slides first, if you like, and then we can go into the spreadsheet and make allocations.
Yeah, let's do that. Just kind of put the lines around what the picture is.
Okay.
These are video lottery dollars, kind of sort of the most flexible dollars that we have coming through the county for economic development, service partners, and emergency food, clothing, and shelter is kind of the concepts that I've picked up over the years. Very much the commissioner's choice of how we want to spend these funds. And then the output of this exercise is the input to the budget, which is kind of the allocations that we choose.
All right, so to start off, kind of analyzing the fund, I was looking at some trends over the last 5 years or so. And some things I noticed kind of during COVID, we were receiving more video lottery proceeds than what the county was awarding out. But in the past 2 years, awards have exceeded the amount of video lottery proceeds that the county's been receiving. In FY24, we're anticipating a 2% increase in video lottery funds that the county will receive. And that so far, actually, this year in FY23, based on what was budgeted, we've received 73,000 more than budgeted. And then just looking at the beginning net working capital. So
Stephanie?
Yep.
That chart for 21, it's a bit misleading because remember I asked you, why is that so low? And okay, so it ended up that we used our T dollars were used to fund EDCO and the chamber. So that was, that was another, $300,000. And so it does, it's almost like it needs to be an asterisk by it, honestly. I went like, wow, we really did that? No, we spent it, but we spent it from a different source.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, if you
I
add
mean, if you're trying to compare and what we've really been doing.
yeah, and if you could imagine, that blue line just being $300,000, it is just a trend going up in spending each year.
And as
Well,
the board will
Take the trend line real well.
Right, yeah, but it makes it not look like, oh, wow, we didn't spend it, and then, oh my gosh, we went really, whereas the trend line, it does balance it out.
And as the board will recall, just because that decision predates Stephanie and her position, that was due to some uncertainty around COVID and what we might see in terms of video lottery revenue, not knowing what that would look like in a time when dining looked different. And so to be conservative, the board that year decided to make some funding allocations out of TRT, which wasn't typical, but to sort of brace for some uncertainty that we didn't really end up seeing on the revenue side, but it was kind of a step to just be cautious in that period of time.
Right, I know we were trying to be conservative.
Well, it looked like it could go, just drop right off a cliff, but it went right up instead. We didn't know which way it was gonna go.
So then looking at beginning net working capital, in FY24, we're estimating this will be just shy of $1 million. And so what this graph shows is in FY21 and 22, the beginning net working capital balance was growing, but in the past couple of years, it's dropped off. And so this yellow line here would show if proceeds that the county received matches video lottery grant funds awarded. So we stay right around $1 million balance in this fund. And then the darker blue line that drops, that shows it's estimated for grants awarded, there was a 5% increase in EDCO and service partner grants annually, which has kind of been the trend. And then staying consistent with other grants like fuel reduction, discretionary grants, and also at the same time receiving a 2% increase in video lottery proceeds. And then I just tried to recap funding requests we've received for FY24. You'll see here a few small increases from requesting organizations. I've kind of laid it out as economic development activities in the upper left, and then grants below that for special project grant recipients in the upper right there, and then service partner requests. And then this is service partner requests broken out. And then lastly, these are just 3 new requests for this year, the Fair and Expo Master Plan, which was sort of just discussed, camping feasibility study. We're tentatively planning for 58,000 to be funded from video lottery in FY23. And then the remaining balance would come out of video lottery in FY24. And then the Affordable Housing Trust Fund could potentially come out of video lottery.
And that trust fund is an idea at this point, but that could be the first place we talk about where money might come from. So then we're gonna work with the live spreadsheet like we have in the past.
And also too, for discussion, in working with finance and the budget team in coming up with the budget for FY24. We're recommending the board consider allocating the funds in FY24 to align with the proceeds coming in. So I've come up with a few draft funding packages the board could look at to kind of try and meet that goal. Otherwise, we can go into the spreadsheet too, and that it's set up to like deduct and show the balance and just play with it.
So, and what does
Work
that look
through
like? Yeah.
I have them.
So we don't have that
No,
paper, okay. So some
I can pass them.
proposed, okay, good,
Yeah.
I got it.
Some out for you.
So
Can I
we'll
ask
see
a question before we kind of dive into this? So in the staff memo, it said, in order to maintain a healthy contingency and fund balance for mid-year or unexpected projects that arise, we should, retain, essentially try to maintain a reserve. I'm just curious, in the history of video lottery funding, what does that look like? What kind of big chunky mid-year things have popped up in the past? Because
That's a good question.
I can look at right now we have $900-something thousand, and I can look at that and say, that's a pretty good cushion, except that I'm not aware of what kind of mid-year things might come up.
Yeah, I'll lead off on that answer and you can round me out. I think, certainly this year, there have been some mid-year decisions to make funding allocations. Chamber support was one that came off cycle that was pretty substantial, I think $75,000 in fiscal year 23. The first portion, that $58,000 funded for camping feasibility, was also sort of unknown at the time that we did the budget for fiscal 23. And I think there have been some increases for grant programs, things like adjustments for arts and culture, which I think has been smaller, more like $30,000. And that we can go back and pull together kind of a list, but I think to kind of speak to the graph Stephanie showed at the beginning, I think we've seen an increase in the last couple years of mid-year additions that are larger than they potentially historically were, which is okay. There's funding there to support those things, but I think it's kind of a decision of the board of how much of a cushion you'd like to leave for those things. And I think in working with finance, it was the recommendation from the budget team that matching expenditures to revenue that we expect to receive is a pretty straightforward way to make sure that we have funds available to meet the commitments we've made and future commitments for larger projects that the board may like to see happen, that we know that we have some funds in reserve to meet priorities when they come up. So does that help?
Yeah, so that, this year's 30, 60, 75K mid-year unanticipated expenditures, that's about as big as you've seen.
So far in FY23, total unexpected was 163,000. And it, included all the things Whitney.
But those are the size.
163,000.
total, yeah.
total, but the size pieces that they come in. There's not, I mean, there's not a history of like, well, 5 years ago, they came in, so-and-so came in with a $250,000, mid-year video lottery.
Correct, and not to steal finances thunder, but I think, we may see some constriction with other funding sources in the future. And so I think part of the strategy with this recommendation, it just provides for that cushion in video lottery for unexpected projects that perhaps in the past have been allocated to other funds like TRT. So,
That's exactly right. I mean, part of it was with the TRT funding, projected to be pretty much used up for courthouse debt, capital maintenance, operations, that thing, nature, and the video lottery might be able to take on some of the external community asks. And for that, we would think that might need a larger contingency if it was a bigger project or one to consider.
And that's just the way that's just where my brain is going with this housing trust fund, workforce housing request, which was originally a request for TRT funding, but I mean, theoretically, if we have $900,000 in the video lottery fund, we could address some portion of that request out of here. As long as there's not other enormous multi-$100,000 things coming in mid-year.
So Stephanie, the 50,000 that went to the Sisters Chamber, is that 50,000 in the 163,000 because it was during the year that we made that allocation?
So in FY23, we gave the Sisters Chamber 75,000. So that's included in the 163. And then their request was for 125 total. So we're looking at that additional 50 to go in FY24.
What was the other funding than the less than 90,000 or whatever it was? Where was that? They came in the middle of the year.
The camping feasibility is 58.
Okay.
Arts and culture was an additional like 17,000. Discretionary grants fundraising from a couple weeks ago was an additional 10 total.
Okay. All right. So we're about up there.
Yeah, so this will be proposed scenarios.
Yes. Okay, so these, there's 4 options here. And I have these all built into a spreadsheet too, so we could even, if you like one of these, start working off of one of these to make it a little bit easier. But option 1 is probably the most similar to FY23. It doesn't include the Fair and Expo master plan or the affordable housing trust.
Stephanie, just to add for the board's sort of awareness before you dive into the scenarios, and correct me if I'm wrong, but all of these scenarios include sort of our internal operating costs to run the fund. So there's ISFs that are charged, and then there's a portion of one of our FTE and admin that spends most of the time with the day-to-day work of this fund. And so that's kind of assumed off the top as we get into these allocations, but just so that you're aware that that's built into all of these.
I mean, like the
models.
56,000 that was allocated
Correct.
in 23?
Correct, yeah, we've assumed that carries forward in these assumptions.
So just for folks watching, we're digesting this right now for the first time, so we'll figure it, and we'll come up with something good here. So just propose scenario.
Another kind of intro question. Can I ask again, there are park dedicated dollars in a line item somewhere for the county. Can somebody explain to me again why we can't use those for this camping feasibility study?
I would need to dig into the I would need to dig into that and follow up with you. I don't know that, at least I personally don't know that that's not an option, but I think we need to do a little bit of research and follow up on that.
Yeah, there's a separate fund, it's at 305. I thought 132, or you talking about park acquisition development. I think I'm with Whitney. I have to look in to see what if there's any ORSs around, or what the requirements around those funds. And we can put that with it.
Trying to figure out what we can pick off this list.
John, was yours about 279,000 last year?
Yeah. 279, 450, great memory.
That's what I calculated it. I added it up. So, okay. So do you really have to have 9.5% increase?
As the costs that are escalating within our budget now, we're running a deficit today.
Yeah.
That's after a 30% increase in membership. Not total numbers, we raised the prices.
Well, yeah, so there's,
Just staff inflationary.
Yeah, materials cost and labor cost and medical dental issues in your budget too.
Go ahead and run through the scenarios for the big pieces that are
Okay.
changing out there. Yeah, we'll start with that one.
Okay, so option 2 is, I would say, probably the most drastic and most different from option 1. So this does not include any chamber support, no county grant programs like discretionary fuel reduction, no more special project support or United Way, but it does fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to $300,000. The half of the Fair and Expo Master Plan, and then the camping feasibility study, all of which are one-time, one-time payments out of video lottery, so that money would free up again in the next fiscal year. Option 3 includes EDCO, chambers, their service partners, some money to grant programs, which the board could determine how much they want to allocate to those. It funds the Fair and Expo Master Plan in full, as well as the camping feasibility study. And then option 4 includes EDCO and service partners. This one has the special project support, so that's Deschutes Collaborative Forest Project, Friends of the Children, those organizations, more money into grant programs that the board could decide how to allocate, and fully funds the Fair and Expo Master Plan and camping feasibility study.
a couple thoughts just to put some structure to this. So Affordable Housing Trust Fund, I don't know about these dollars, but like that $300,000 seems like a good number to start with. As in, they're asking for $1 million or some big number, but 300,000 could be a number to get started. So I just say, just to get some words out on that one. I don't mind splitting the Fair and Expo Master Plan support to 50% of requests. That's one of my thoughts off the top of my head. And also possibly pulling the camping feasibility study out too. I mean, I like the idea if there's other ways to find those dollars. It is an investment. This is a great use of those dollars also. But if we could peel that off, that'd be interesting. So yeah, I mean, none of those answer anything. I'm just talking about.
So
things that
Stephanie,
jump out at me.
you can answer this, but what do we pay for the master plan at the fairgrounds? Like in 17 or 18 or something like that? I know we paid a bunch of money.
So this on Zoom, I don't know if you could bring.
I mean, I was just curious, because I mean, we paid for something then, I'm not sure if that's gonna be utilized. And then I noticed that we already pay like $500,000 for the fire free at the transfer stations. And we jumped it up to 100,000. And I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, you know, you pointed out, we paid 20,000 for grants in the past, and definitely I would like to go back. I know people really appreciate being able to apply for that, but we need to go back. Because we're
To go
already,
back to the original $20,000 of funding support for that
Right.
program.
yeah,
Well, I mean, it's different things as well. I mean, you subsidize fire free, it's coming out of, I believe it comes out of solid wastes. Comes out of tipping fees essentially. And it's for people to dispose of material. While these grants help people get the work done on their property. Stimulate people to do the fuels reduction at their home. It doesn't address necessarily what you're gonna do with the waste when you're done. We've kind of dodged the bullet for the last 2-3 years, where we haven't had a significant size fire in Deschutes County near, immediately adjacent to populated areas, but we've dodged the bullet. We were super lucky. That's not, there's no guarantee that that's going to happen again this year or in future years. And that work by people's homes is critically important to reducing the likelihood that they're going to lose their home.
Well, the good news is that we have, 70 Firewise communities now. We were at like 35 when I first started. And I definitely believe in people cleaning up. And there was a lot of grant funding that Kevin brought up at the meeting the other day. And we actually need more participants at the fire free meetings. We need people from all the cities there so they can hear about all the different grants. Yeah, there aren't enough people there. And hopefully this next meeting, we will have an internet service that works and I will bring donuts. So, no, I mean, really, because I listen to Kevin and all the different grants and it's really, it's good. But I just feel like we have to cut back somewhere. So we're picking up the big expense at transfer station. I don't know, it was $500,000 when I started this in 2020. I remember they said, oh, it's gonna be $500,000. And I go, what does one fire cost Deschutes County? So we've been doing it for quite a few years now. Maybe we need to look at that cost again and see where it's at.
Commissioner, just as you kind of give staff feedback, which is really helpful, would it help you if we pull up the spreadsheet and kind of start just so that you can kind of see, or would you prefer to kind of stay with the slides?
So you mentioned, let's get Jeff. So Jeff is available for the fairgrounds. So
Right.
there's a $200,000 ask.
Well, he wasn't here when that study was done. It was prior to, it was before Jeff. It was, I don't know, 17, 18, something like that. I don't know, Jeff, did you ever see that study? Do you know what the county spent for that?
Good afternoon, commissioners. I apologize, I can't join you today. I asked Elise in our internal chat to see if she could pull up a number of what that was. It was prior to my time, so I'm not exactly sure what the cost was, but give me a few minutes and I'll see if I can have an answer for you.
Anyway, great job this weekend. Another successful weekend at the Deschutes County Fairgrounds. So thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you.
And then timing wise, we have a big agenda item after this. People are going to be starting to look for. So I'm just saying, we could debate every one of these things for a while here. So we'll kind of figure out how far we want to go with this. And maybe we won't even get landed today, but it's good to talk about it.
Yeah, I really like going on it. I mean, it's nice you've given us options, but honestly, I like going through them line item by line item because, one of my favorites is Friends of the Children, and we've given them 20,000 in 23, and I know they're asking for 50, but we really have to seriously look at what we can do because our funding sources are being impacted.
So yeah, now, and this is what we've done in the past. Oh, look at that, just right.
There we are.
Yeah, so we can kind of jump down this now and see if there's anything that jumps out we want to commit to or start to put the big numbers together.
So there's the explanation of why EDCO is asking for 9.5.
Yeah.
So this is laid out for economic development in the first top half, special projects, then our service partners, and then grant programs, and then the 3 new requests at the bottom. So is there a section you want to start with?
So what are the requests as they're listed total right now for the 24? What's the bottom number?
Total is 1.3 million.
Okay, it's kind of like the state budget that's 15 billion over, right? And you're telling us, what is the number that we really should shoot for?
This is the target right here.
The 1084?
But the 1.3 doesn't include any money for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, so if there was an investment, that would drive that number up.
Yeah.
Seems like a number of us have expressed support for the idea of doing part of the Fair and Expo master plan this year. Rather than that full 200,000. We can start with that.
50%?
What, 100,000? I mean, don't you think? I mean,
As I say, once we put numbers to this, we may not get it finished, or we may still over allocate, but we don't have to call it done today, or we might dial some back.
so the 60 and the 25 are what we normally get for our personal allocations then, and on a quarterly basis.
Yep, 60, is total for discretionary grants. So this year we'll finish with 26,000. So I've put in 25 here, but this number in FY 23 was 15,000 originally, 15 or 60.
Okay, we maybe should go back.
Go back down.
To what, 15?
Yeah, so I mean, for a fundraiser event, any $1,000, $2,000 can really make a difference, because that's money to just amplify somebody's fundraising, so, I support that also.
And be a lot more disciplined.
Well,
Haven't been, but
But that-
support that. Yeah.
Oh, yes. And I'd move the 60 over, that's what, 50, 20 a commissioner for 4 quarters, so, yeah.
Well, then for the fuel reduction grants, 100,000 is, pretty generous too. I mean, we now that back.
We were at 20,000 before.
Yeah, historically that program was funded at 20, and then the last 2 years, I think we've been at 100,000. And Kevin did say he felt like there was demand to meet that, but certainly I think there'd be flexibility within natural resources to allocate whatever's provided.
Yeah, I mean, because I think of 20, 25, 30,000 or something, when you can coordinate a community to bring their small dam or trees or limbs, whatever, to the edge of the road, just drive that chipper around. It could be a $600 or $800 contract for a neighborhood. It's not, full service, but that sure adds value, getting a chipper to go down a neighborhood road. So.
Could you put 20,000 in?
I would advocate for a little bit higher.
Well, yeah, some number.
One thing to think about is, both Kevin and Corinne are new. And having a little bit more funds to work with helps, I think would be beneficial for them in building their relationships around the county as well. So I would pitch 50,000.
I wouldn't. They've had the Juniper grant funding from the BLM. I've been trying to get that out for months, and we're still trying to get it out. And I think they need to realize that every dollar they have of money that they can get out, it should be gotten out, because it's just been sitting there, and the time value of dollars. So I don't know. I think going with 20, and then if we find that we have some extra funding, I would be really happy to put it there. But I'd like to know, what's it costing the county at solid waste now? Is it now 750,000 at service that we're providing? If it was 500,000 in 20, what is it now?
I guess, a counterexample, I would say, without our natural resources staff, we wouldn't have been able to secure $6.25 million of Senate Bill 762 landscape resiliency funding for large landowners. Like each of these pots of money is has a niche, right? So if if the money for landowners adjacent to BLM is kind of unique and it's been kind of difficult to find the right match, that's one thing. But, you know, for example, that 6.25 million, that is going out to really big landowners, you know, the Shanda Asset Management to, you know, all the way to like, you know, Park and Rec District, the Land Trust. Some of our county lands. So they're, you know, it's not like they're not busy deploying money to key projects.
Just negotiate a number and get her.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that this, you know, in the same way that each of those is a unique niche, you know, the landscape resiliency is for large ownerships. There's that BLM, you know, special BLM adjacent money. This fills a particular niche for small landowners, you know, flexibly across the county. And I am gonna pitch again, 50,000. I think it's not an unreasonable amount of money to give our natural resources staff the tools they need to support this work happening all over the county.
Just a little bit blank for now. I think we need to look at the other things. You know, we're gonna have to cut back on some things. It's clear, we're gonna have to cut back.
Yeah,
We
so
spent
that's fine, let's do that, 'cause let's try to get.
million, we are going to have to cut back, and Robert's talking about 800,000 for the fair plan.
Want to go through service partners?
Sure, why not?
So Central Oregon Council on Aging, FY23, pay them 42,500. They're requesting 50,000 this year.
And what did we do the year before, prior to 22? Was that like 30,000?
Let me see, not here.
That's a bump, 42,000 is a bump up already.
And we gave
Prior
them,
year was 40,000, and it was that consistent for the 3 years prior.
So it's just for 42.5, we've been saying.
not anymore.
For almost all of the service partners, I would say that
Not bump stuff
we,
up.
not, you know, to try not to bump stuff up too much.
I mean, so many of them were respectful and they weren't asking for any more funding than what they got in 23. Like I put the seniors, the Redmond Senior Center back to the 12.
So keep consistent for
Yeah,
all and just, okay.
And that was, yeah, that was some of the proposals that here was the FY23 also.
Right.
Okay, and I would say that for the special project requests, I mean, that would be my recommendation, special project requests as well.
Like we gave Saving Grace extra money with ARPA funding and they were having all kinds of issues and, you know, we did give them extra money there. You know, we gave Council on Aging a huge amount of funding.
Okay. So those are all the same. We're about halfway. Balance.
I mean, we're at 536,000.
So then, yeah, the
Remaining balance 548.
Okay.
Special project support.
So the water collaborative, forest collaborative, friends of the children, keep all those the same.
That would be my.
From the
that would
prior
be my
year.
proposal.
Yeah.
Was the cultural coalition,
Yeah, I don't have a feel for that one.
I thought it was a one-time request for 25K. but,
Could you take it out till we investigate that one, please? Thanks, Stephanie.
I mean, I thought when they presented it, it was a one-time request, but you know, clearly
Well, this is kind
they've
of-
asked again.
I think
And this is kind of either or with arts and culture grants too, maybe, is one way I was thinking.
my
recollection, which may not be perfect, but my recollection is kind of these special project support category was carved out in a way where many of them did originate as one-time funding requests, and it's at the board's discretion how you'd like to continue to fund them beyond. That's kind of their distinction from the service partner category,
Right.
apart from some eligibility criteria, but many of them did come in an initial 1-year request, and some have been, like the Ben Chamber Child Care Accelerator request, that was a 1 year that came in 1 year and then was removed in the prior year. So I think these are really at the board's discretion in terms of continued support.
Well, I would say, thank goodness Friends of the Children has a program this summer that's gonna work with kids so they can read, which is wonderful. And I do believe they got over $1 million from Mrs. Bezos for their program. So the good news is hopefully they'll have the ability to keep doing what they're doing, and the great news is they're in La Pine now.
So keep 2020 and 20 for those.
Yeah, unless things, unless we are like pleasantly surprised. Remember with COVID, how we were pleasantly surprised? I know, Christine was here, and I see Sun River was only asking for 3 million, or 3,000 more than, 3 million more, right? So, yes.
So the Cultural Coalition says that, they're matching these dollars by the Horticultural Trust. So I kind of think of it as either or for this or the arts and culture application. Because arts and cultural sometimes, yeah, so let's put $25,000 there, and then the arts and culture grants application.
I could potentially support that. What that does is it takes arts and culture small grant decisions out of our hands and entrusts it to the Cultural Coalition, which they are arts and culture people. So, but essentially what we're doing is saying, you are managing these grant funds for us.
And we can, can spin it as that, this is the program I'm supporting this year. Please cast your net wide.
I think we'll support that.
So yeah, 25,000.
Well, but what we're zeroing out, the arts and culture grants was what, 30?
Yes, 30, and then this year it was actually 40.
Yeah, usually, you get all the grant requests and they're like, oh, let's just round up and give somebody.
So if we're gonna consolidate into one, maybe we can make it 30.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. That's fine.
Just one.
Yeah, so 0 there and 30 for the cultural trust.
Is that going to a specific group though?
No, there's
The Cultural Coalition, they do granting. They grant stuff out, and they're doing that with the state cultural trust monies.
So the Beat Theater for Kids, the Pine Park and Rec Sisters Outdoor Film Show. As examples.
I mean, I do like the idea of not having a redundant process, basically 2 small grant arts and culture programs trying to run at the same time.
I would leave it at the 25. I wouldn't raise it anymore.
Well, let's leave it there for now, and then we'll see if we can get back to it.
So then what happens when we go up to
We can type
EDCO and
quick.
do that one?
Yeah, so I'm still excited about the traded sector promotion opportunities, the CHIPS Act, all the great capacity we have at EDCO and in our cities and communities. So I'd like to start with that request at 306, see if we can get there.
Yeah, why don't you pop the number in and let's see where our totals are going? And also with, there's what, Sun River and
Yeah,
Sisters?
what else do we have?
So it seems like we committed to the Sisters request of the 50.
So since we were there, and I know Judy's in the room, but we had that joint meeting with the city council, and that was interesting dynamics. You know, I didn't have a feel for, you know, the marketing, it's all happened. Maybe I'm gonna touch a nerve here by mentioning it, but man, it's kind of like up in the air over there a little bit, so.
I would agree with you.
Yeah, so I don't know. But did you see that? I mean, they brought the promotion people in, and it wasn't the chamber.
Yes.
So I mean, I didn't have a feel for that when we first talked about it.
What is it, Destination Management Organizations, DMO, is that what it's called? And you
It's a
can say
city
DMSO and that's horse medicine.
Started its own tourism agency.
But how are the businesses doing? So
Well-
Judy, if we didn't give you the 50,000, what would you say?
It would be bleak, I will say.
Well, and I always do support Chamber of Commerce being a membership organization promoting small business. And it's really, you know, evolved a little bit in the small towns, La Pine and Sun River. It's the, you know, the chamber and marketing opportunity and event promotion, all the different things. So now we've seen, you know, some very specific happen in Sisters. La Pine hasn't changed, but Sun River has always been in that situation too, where if it's a Chamber of Commerce, it's a membership organization, paying members, promoting small business. So, you know, I want to be true to missions, but I guess the conclusion coming to you.
Well, I would go back to the 45 and 20 for Sun River. Christine's doing a great job and everything, but I'm just, you know, every dollar we can save today, we can, you know, reassess.
Well, I'd support Chamber General Operations, not Shop Sun River possibly.
Yeah, but those businesses have to survive all year long, and at the last meeting, they give a really clear indication of what was happening. You know, and then you've got to have your staff, and then will you have your staff, because you know, you're really not that busy, so it makes it so hard.
Yeah,
But it is, I mean, is that the responsibility of the chamber membership to have the shops under their campaign? I mean,
It seems to me. Chris, do you want to say anything?
The Shops on River campaign is necessary during our slow seasons to bring the tourists and locals to the businesses and to educate people what we have at our businesses. For example, at one of our businesses, they sell sandals and water sandals for the same price as you would get at Fred Meyer's, but people think if you go to the village, they're less money. So that's something we're trying to educate our locals and our tourists about, why it's just economical to shop locally than it would be to shop elsewhere.
right, but I guess when I said, isn't that the responsibility of the businesses? And of the members, you know, a campaign to get people to come to the establishments in Sun River, it seems like that if you should be able to get members to contribute to anything, that you should be able to get them to contribute to that. You know, so I would also support the general operations, but I'm not sure whether it makes sense to be supporting the campaign. I mean, just to kind of pull it up to the higher level here, these lottery dollars, they are absolutely supposed to be used for economic development purposes. So like I want us to support EDCO and chambers, but I'm not sure what the appropriate level is. And the other thing that's going through my head is if we really want to be able to do the workforce housing investment, you know, which in my mind is absolutely economic development, an economic development investment that's good for everybody. Then we need to take some funds from somewhere in the mix here, and we've been kind of squeezing and tightening in a lot of places. And this is but this may be a place where we need to squeeze and tighten some as well.
Jim, do you have any comments? Because I know you have that fabulous gallery.
You can push for affordable housing, but if you don't have any businesses open, you're not gonna need the affordable housing for full businesses. Sun River is a very seasonal thing, And I agree, and as a premier member of the Chamber of Commerce in Sun River, the gallery really does appreciate the fact that we're trying to draw people both from Lapine and from Bend to come to Sun River. If anything, I think all of South County needs more push from to pull people down in Bend, and a small investment there would actually be, to my mind, would be a large investment in terms of the health of the workforce in South County. That's an opinion, you can take it for what you want.
So go ahead and put 45 for general operation for Sun River. Yeah, Shop Sun River is partner. Yeah, I don't support that specifically at this time. We'll see if we get there.
Well, maybe it should have been just put all up in Sun River Chamber, because I did say earlier in this meeting that 73% of the room tax revenue on that schedule, I think it's 5.3 million, 5.2 million in the room tax, is all coming from Sun River. And I'm so glad that, you know, their public safety, you know, the fire station, police station together are being done. And of course, we've allocated that, but you are still contributing big time to Deschutes County's revenue.
Well, and I say that it's in mind that Visit Central Oregon is well funded and can spin it like this too. So I'm just thinking out loud. Go ahead, Christine.
So that Shop Sun River budget also I use for other things, like today I taught a class on how to use Canva. So just to get people going and support other businesses, I bought lunch from Josie K's as a way to help Josie K's, because it's a slow time right now. So, you know, we had the 8 people that came today to help educate them about something they didn't know. And then I go a lot to businesses and do that to help them, provide them skills that they don't have.
If I may say something, sure. I have seen 0 from COVA go to anything in the Sun River Village or the Sun River Business Park. It works really well for getting conventions at the hotels. It does nothing for businesses.
Yeah.
Another example is I spent maybe like 3 days working with Destination Oregon, having them come to Sun River, play producer, walked around, showed them all the different businesses so they can produce a video on Sun River. So that's part of something, that's part of.
Okay, good, thank you. So now, I'm thinking timing wise, we got to get rolling here.
Well, you know, I will vote for the 20 to go there, and we'll just hope that we can figure that away.
So then Sisters Chamber,
Yes.
50,000. As I say, I see, you know, there's a lot of support for that Sisters brand. Now the city council has made a pretty strong statement, so you know, I'm not as clear on where, you know, what's the next few steps there, I guess. You know, and I'd like to talk to you more about that, so I'm just not clear.
So is that something we have to, okay. We couldn't all do that. We can do this entire project today, though, could we? That would be really.
What else do we have open?
Right, it's pretty close.
Okay, then what's the balance?
United Way,
Or how far negative are we?
oh, let's see. Remaining 107.
And I think it's just the decision points on the bottom red banded category of if you'd like to make those allocations out of this year's estimated revenue.
You mean next year's revenue?
Correct.
Yes, next year's revenue.
Yes, my mind is already.
I know, it's okay.
Next year.
So we should find out about if we can use that funding, what was it, 132 or something, if we can use that for the other 42,000.
Do you want to leave it there for today then?
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, so yeah, we're.
I mean, I think the Sisters Chamber is really important. They do a lot of excellent good work for the community, and you do see some of the businesses are having a harder time right now. There was no traffic hardly coming over Friday afternoon from Salem over the pass. I was shocked how little traffic it was, and I was actually at Sisters Coffee early Saturday morning, and it wasn't really busy. Yeah, it was very interesting. So it just feels like some things are a bit quieter than they have been.
So then, as I say, I propose we leave it there for now, and we're down to a few other items, and there's discussions to be had, so we can, you know, regroup and discuss anything else you want to fill out.
So they,
I do not see how we get to being able to allocate funds to this workforce housing initiative. With what we've already laid out, so.
Yeah, there's, it was a TRT ask, this video lottery.
Yeah.
We're talking about it.
Yeah, and as we're gonna discuss in just a few minutes, there's no TRT to put into that either, so. Yeah, I mean, I
well, do we all
guess,
cut back?
I guess I would just say, we put some initial thought into this, but I think, I would just like us not to think of any of the numbers we put down as firm yet.
That's fine. As I say, I mean, it's a good discussion.
Well, maybe we actually cut back on our grant funding, that the quarterly grant funding. I mean, if we're asking everyone else to eat it, we maybe should eat that too. And, or what is it, 60,000? Maybe we could cut that back to 40. I don't know.
I'd be happy to carry my $2,000 over.
Oh, no, don't worry, it'll be lost, because that's what always happened to me.
Well, it goes away, apparently.
No, it doesn't go away. I carried mine forward a couple years ago, but it did go away, but I knew I had it, so.
I was notified that it will go away if I don't use it, so.
Well, it shows up in next year's beginning.
Not necessarily.
It's not necessarily mine.
No, it doesn't. You have to fight for it.
All the numbers people are in the room. Are you saying they're all?
Yeah, no, it disappeared for me. I had like $1,718 and I had to prove it. So what's our funding at then for our grants? Is that like 60?
60.
So what if we cut ours back to what, 40?
Divisible by 3.
Yeah, by 3, 30?
36.
45.
Yeah, 36 would be lovely.
I think 45 is good.
45.
I mean, if we're expecting everyone else to cut back.
Yeah.
We've got to eat it too.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, we can come back to this, but
we're getting there.
Okay.
Great job. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thanks for answering all my questions today. You were
Oh, you're welcome.
No, you were really good. I thank you.
Okay, so. Item number 5, countywide long-term financial forecast and courthouse debt service presentation. That was the real reality.
So we know how much we spent then on that fair plan. In the back of the
I think we
financials,
just may not be able to
pull it up
real time.
immediately.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was a lot.
Good morning, Commissioner. Good afternoon.
Oh, don't give me coffee to get,
That's right.
please.
Robert Tintle, Chief Financial Officer.
Dan Everson, Budget Manager.
So we are here today to talk about the long-term financial forecast. As you all know, I do have a few opening comments that I want to share first in their prepared remarks. It's not necessarily for this room. I know we're all very informed and well educated. However, it's also for those who may be watching online or for history. And so just really it's about thinking about, I think we're already there, but it's our mindset that really we are in a kind of a different place than we were before, and some recommendations from GFOA for when you are in tight situations like this, what should you be thinking about? So I'm just going to read through those. In just a few minutes, Dan Emerson will be presenting an overview of the general fund, TRT projections, and other financial information. Again, before we begin, like I said, I just want to highlight a few comments, so bear with me, but it's really for the benefit of everyone watching as well. So it's not uncommon for local governments to focus on 1 year at a time as they develop their annual budget, because as Oregon local budget law prescribes, you have to approve your budget annually. And yes, anything you don't spend lapses at that year, but it does carry over and beginning working capital in next year. So as you are aware, focusing only on the near term is a short-sighted view and neglects the consequences of current decisions and the long-term financial impacts of those decisions. This is similar to working within our own personal budget, right? The buy now, pay later promotion that we see if you want to purchase a TV. You don't have to make a payment for 4 years, but eventually that time comes in year 5 when you're surprised and you receive a bill in the mail, and now there's a huge payment. And we've done a good job, with this as a county, but again, it's just a mindset we need to think about, that the decision made 5 years ago, now it comes due, but for some reason, we still don't have enough funds to cover the cost. So without keeping that long-term vision in mind and of the financial forecast and the near-term financial discipline, the county would face an uncertain financial future. And this is the situation many local governments find themselves in now when they suddenly have to cut millions of dollars out of a current or a next year's budget because they're not looking at the long term or the future. They're mostly focusing on the near term. And we've done a great job avoiding that here at Deschutes County. And so we want to continue to avoid that situation. And thus, that's why we're looking at this long-term financial forecast here today. It's a tool to assist us. And so just keep that in mind. We don't know, as we heard about earlier today from Treasurer Bill Kuhn, we don't know what the near-term or long-term economic outlook will be with certainty, but we will continue to look at all the current economic indicators as a measure of future economic conditions. For example, U.S. consumer spending has slowed markedly while we've seen a reduction in savings and an increase in personal credit card use and their balances. However, thus far, the consumer has also been resilient during this whole uncertain time. The Fed forecast language now includes the use of a phrase mild recession, but yet they also say it's not a foregone conclusion, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty out there. There is an ongoing tight labor market, and as we know, inflation is persistent and continues. And we recently experienced 2 large commercial bank failures, and we're still, who knows what the impacts are there with tightening credit as well. Mortgage origination and refinancing has declined significantly, which has impacted our revenues as well. This all points to uncertainty, as Bill talked about earlier today. So as you'll see in today's presentation at Deschutes County, we have seen a reduction in our recording fee revenue of $1 million. I presented on that earlier this fiscal year alone due to the reduced activity and increasing interest rates. CDD is expecting 2.2 million under budgeted in their revenue targets this year due to volume decreases. And that decreased activity, it's a forward-looking indicator is how we interpret some of that information. We talked about transient room tax decreased over previous year during the last 4 months. And during the same period that revenues have decreased, our expenditures have increased. So many county services will be seeking board approval for fee increases this year to help cover costs, as we heard, just like other areas throughout the county, businesses and nonprofits as well. So finance officers, what's our role here? So we're here and we're positioned to help assure long-term financial stability of the government. Our job is just to present the information. You all get the tough job of making the decisions and setting policy, and we appreciate that as well. So the Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, they list guiding principles for spending, and they came out with this when ARPA first came out, but it's really their principles specific to the nature of any time you are doing budgeting or spending decisions, and when you have a tough time balancing your budgets. They want to make sure to balance the financial environment with limited resources and economic uncertainty, such as we're facing now. So the GFOA's guiding principles lay out a broad framework to help strengthen our strategic decision-making for the short-term and long-term decisions, recognizing we have both that we have to make. So specifically, the GFOA states that care should be taken to avoid creating new programs or add-ons to existing programs that require an ongoing financial commitment. Additional budget restraint may be necessary to achieve and maintain structural balance in future budgets. So during the presentation, if you haven't already noticed in the slides, you can observe the general fund forecast and point out where and when our ongoing expenditures become greater than our ongoing revenues. GFOA further states local jurisdictions should be cognizant of state level efforts and potential enhancements of state funding revenues and resources, which we're always mindful of, and any new legislation that may be created each year, which we are in the middle of our legislative session. We need to take time and careful consideration They recommend avoiding rushed decisions about using funds. And finally, adequate time should be taken to carefully consider all alternatives for the prudent use of funds prior to committing the resources to ensure the best use of limited resources. GFOA further reminds us that, just a reminder, rating agencies will continue to evaluate and look at your funds, and they really look at, to formulate its credit opinion, they'll consider your level of reserves and also look at your structural budget balance. Use of funds to make strategic investments in long-lived assets. GFOA reminds us to rebuild reserves to enhance financial stability and then to cover temporary operating shortfalls until economic conditions and operations normalize. So they recognize at times in the near term you have to make other decisions, but just keep in mind that long term. So in recent years, the county, we've had the luxury, as like other counties and governments, between the CARES Acts and ARPA fund that has come in, we've received a lot of funds and the opportunity to invest in many of the vital community services that we have here. But now as we transition into our new financial environment, we need to balance the community needs while also being mindful of the core services that we provide here at the county to the community while ensuring our fiscal stability at the same time, which isn't always easy, I might add. So ARPA funds highlighted the importance of fiscal stability in the local government, and that's why they actually named it Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds, because they realized the importance of first getting your fiscal house in order, taking care of yourself so that you can help others in the community and provide the services as well. Again, it's kind of like being on an airplane, the mask come down, you put your own mask on first, then you help those around you as well. So keeping that in mind, the comparison really is, it's talking about the financial stability and security of the county so that we can also assist the community. So I'm nearing the end here. Today's economic environment and the Deschutes County financial position, as mentioned, is different than what it was prior to COVID. We don't have the available resources like we used to. And this is the time when our expenditures are, as I mentioned, increasing faster than our revenues. And we're endeavoring to fund the expansion of the courthouse. Our long-term forecast takes both of these factors into consideration. So we can continue to effectively steward our available resources while, as our mission states, enhancing the lives of citizens by delivering quality services in a cost-effective manner. It's what we continue to do. So now, as I'll turn over to Dan in our presentation, finally get to the meat of what you're here for today. Let's focus on the long-term forecast while keeping in mind and looking through the lens that GFOA guides us and makes their recommendations when you're looking at these decisions as well.
Robert, the only thing I'll offer in addition is, as you mentioned, the finance department and CFO and your guidelines. You present the information and then elected officials and the budget committee make the decisions. There is an intermediate step there, and that is that as the budget officer with our team, we provide a proposal to the budget committee. And so my only comment as we get started is that this information also informs, I'll call it mine, but really it's ours as our team's budget proposal to the board. But certainly let's go ahead and begin. Thank you.
Absolutely, great clarification, because yes, the GFOA does consider the budget officer as a vital financial person in here. So thank you for the clarification.
All right, so starting up on our presentation, the long-term financial update, we've been working on these models, the general fund models, TRT models, and countywide fiscal models for about last year and a half. We were able to update them now that we feel confident in our fiscal 23 and the actuals and fiscal 24 budget. So today's topics, we'll be going through a funding sources overview of kind of our available funds for debt, capital maintenance, capital projects, minimal capital projects. We'll be discussing the general fund forecast, the courthouse funding scenarios. We'll also be going over the transient room tax forecast, and then looking at all those funds, transient room tax, general fund, and other funds together for all of our available fund forecast. And then we'll be comparing that against our expenditures and seeing, if those two can meet each other, evaluating potential future financial priorities, commitments that are not in the model yet, and then looking at some of the considerations from finance and administration, and then of course talking about the health benefits fund at the end. And just want to say a big shout out to
Administration too. We worked with them heavily on this to get the right presentation, hopefully. Recently today, we did find a couple of errors. I found a couple of errors in our TRT graph, so it'll be slightly different than what you have here, but it's nothing really material, I would say. And I'll go over those. So again, the purpose statement is to focus on the forecasted countywide financial position and debt service obligations prior to the fiscal year 2024 budget week. I know we have our budget committee members here, some of them, and this is kind of an educational overview designed to help the decision makers by giving you some information. So first, let's talk about some more available funding sources for debt and maintenance. And when I talk about debt, I'm specifically talking only about the courthouse debt, not any additional debt we may take on. And when I talk about maintenance, I'm talking about just our facilities are getting older, and we need to do that general maintenance, whether it's HVAC or roof, every single year. And so kind of the funding sources for debt and capital maintenance. Right now, we have prior and current years general fund. So we're estimating $6.1 million in fiscal year 24. In that fund, that includes the max tax levy in this assumption. And obviously at one point we had close to 12 million, but we are blessed to be able to pay for those buildings, the NOCO building, parts of the public safety campus, phase 1 with cash. But we're at 6.1 currently. And then another available fund will be the future years general fund. We'll be looking at all those cash infusions. Prior and current year TRT, last fiscal year, the board and the budget committee made the decision to move $3.5 million of unallocated TRT into the reserve to cover future debt service potentially. So that's 3.5 of that 4.2 million, and then there's going to be another 700,000 projected in fiscal year 24. And then we also have the future years TRT, and then something we briefly talked about at the mid-year budget, which is not in the proposed budget and will be a budget committee decision or board decision, would be the LATCF funds. Those are the local assistance tribal consistency funds from ARPA. We have 4.6 million. They have general purpose, and we had talked at the mid-year budget committee about potentially if the board decided to allocate those towards the courthouse debt. In this allocation, those LATC funds are in there. All the funding sources that I just discussed will be needed to pay for the debt and capital maintenance. And now we're going to discuss those forecasts for each funding source, going to go through them one by one and talk about countywide overall operations and debt obligations. And just after I finish any slide, if the board has any questions, just go ahead and stop me and reach out.
So the scope of this is we're calling it capital and maintenance debt. I mean, is this just courthouse or all buildings, I guess?
It really would be, when you think about our structure as a county, we can pay for our operations, and then the remaining general fund, the available general fund pays for capital maintenance and capital projects, or at least it has. So the scope of this would be debt plus minimum capital maintenance plus minimal capital projects. We're not talking the public safety campus. We're not talking a new building. We're talking over 20 years, just having minimal FTE increases where you need a little bit of space.
So yeah, existing facilities and the courthouse.
Correct.
Okay, good, that helps.
Right.
Get a little clearer, okay.
Right, because those are typically the funds, the available funds cover. Okay. All right, so moving on to our general fund operational forecast. So just as an overview, the general fund is made up of multiple departments as the district attorney's office, the clerks, the assessor, veterans office, tax, property management, medical examiner, and then transfer out to other departments that need support for their operations. The largest transfers to other departments are the health services, 6.8 million this fiscal year 24, and community justice juvenile also 6.8 million this fiscal year.
So actually for this year, it's projected to be 6.5 for juvenile.
I think fiscal year 24, sorry.
Okay, so you've already got a number?
A proposed
Okay.
number.
So you're saying it's gonna be more than it was?
Yes, I think both health services and community justice juvenile had about a 4% increase, which was better than expected given the inflation. You know, we hear EDCO talking about it and other folks. But yeah, they're both going to be around 6.8 in the proposed budget at this time. just as an overview, the major source of revenue in the general fund is the property taxes, but it also has been supported through various smaller grants and especially through the clerk's office fees and the assessor's grant. Departmental expenditures are currently the greatest cost to the fund. So the departmental expenditures are growing at a rate that makes it the greatest cost. Okay. So here's a smaller projection of the general fund operations, general fund revenue versus expenditure forecast in the general fund. These assumptions are based on the historical growth and expenditure rates. So let me touch on those. That's the departmental growth rate in the general fund is about 8.2% and for all departments over the last 8 years. Obviously, some departments are growing faster than others. But our growth rate in terms of the tax rate in that same amount of time has been about 5.5% assessed value growth. And so you can see just from that our departmental expenditures are growing at a rate that's faster than our property taxes. And for this 20-year forecast or 25-year forecast, where you have a projected 4.9% assessed value growth in the property tax, which is an increase of about 0.3% over the 25-year average for urban areas in Oregon. We did talk to a few experts in this individual in this area. They felt like Bend and Deschutes County may not see that 5.5 very much longer, if ever get back to that, just because of the growth and the boundaries. So we feel like although 4.9 maybe isn't generous, it certainly isn't conservative. When we originally started this model, it was closer to 4.5, 4.6. It just doesn't work with that kind of level of general fund revenue property tax growth.
So that department growth, you were talking about 8-something%, is that increase in cost of operations plus that next FTE once in a while? You know, not all departments grow by FTE, but some do. Is that including both of those?
Including both, sorry, the COLA and the.
Yeah, just the cost of doing business
The
over
cost
time
of doing
plus
business.
the next FTE.
Exactly.
Both of those.
Yeah, and so it'd be hard to really project out what it is, you know, and we'll talk about some of the
Just over
reasons. Yeah, but it's a mixture of those last 2 years, that max COLA that we've done, plus the FTE growth.
And
Plus-
again, specific only to the FTE for the general fund, not other.
Plus, you know, there were some really well done studies that for the DA's office, for example, and those also increased expenditures for the general fund. And so right here, we're going to look at FY 23 to FY 24. So in this assumption is that $1.8 million of the max tax levy increase that gets us to $1, I think 0.2783 per $1,000 of assessed value. And you can see that it's not a huge gap. We would have expected this jump from 23 to 24 be a little bit larger. And the reason that isn't there is because we've lost, as I think Robert spoke to in the financial report, we've lost over $1 million of clerk fees. We've lost 500,000 since fiscal year 22 of assessors revenue. So within the general fund, we're losing, you know, the same amount that we're making up with this tax increase, which is one of the things in the projections, just so the board knows, I do have those revenues going back up over time for the assessor and the clerk, but the drop off, especially with the clerk, has been, I think, 1.7 million over the last 3 years. And so that's a large amount. And so as we get out into the out years here, we can see that fiscal year 33, 34, there's a crossover between expenditures and revenue, which means that the general fund not only doesn't have available funds, but it can't support itself. It can't meet its minimum contingency requirement. And that's what we'll talk about on this in a couple slides here. So again, this is same assumptions, 4.9% revenue and historical expenditures. You see that this is the available general funds at the year end. Normally, historically, this is going to be used for capital maintenance and projects. And we have used it for that, almost all of it. I think in fiscal year 23, we had a general fund available cash balance of 1.9 million before we moved in that TRT. We're projected to kind of decline rapidly due to those max COLAs and operational growth. You can see this green dotted line here. This is without a max tax levy. You can see the difference is from this 3.6 million to about this FY 24 million of about 5. So It's a large difference, and that's part of the reason why we need to do the tax levy now, is so that that curve isn't even steeper, because we just run down really quickly, can't even hit our contingency requirements much quicker than FY33 if we don't do that tax levy. So
You played that dotted green line out. I mean, we can see your projection with, going to the max tax levy. If that dotted green line continued to FY 25-26, would it track that other blue line, or would it hit zero much?
It would
more
hit
quickly?
zero much more more quickly, and it wouldn't have the same slope as that line either, because that line includes that $1.8 million tax levy compounding as part of the revenue. So it would have much less than that. It would hurt. And it's certainly something that if the board wanted us, we could look into, but it would be significantly prior to FY33.
I just wanted to be sure I was projecting in my head.
Yeah. And the full tax levy, as you can tell from here, is not going to substantially slow the long-term decrease in available general funds. Generally speaking, we'd hope that that full tax levy would kind of stable out our operational levels. But in this case, if our operations keep growing at the assumed growth rate for the last 7-8 years, it wouldn't be enough to really balance that out.
Well, I mean, if what you just described about where the dotted green line goes after 24 is true, then it doesn't, we still get to the get to the bad place by 33, 34, but we get to the bad place much later.
Right. And part of this presentation is for the community, and part of it is, to discuss the importance of that tax levy and of the operations. So going on to the next slide, this is our general fund operations forecast going out essentially through, I believe, fiscal year 47. So almost a 25-year look here. It's the same graph as the other one, except it goes out farther. You can see how the compounding expenditures really kind of work. And so in this case, the orange line is going to be your total expenditures, which surpasses your total revenue in the general fund around FY 33, 34. At that point, it's going to affect our minimum contingency level, which is that yellow line. And beginning with net working capital in the general fund will drop below that contingency level. And that contingency level, once you drop below that, that's kind of your minimum savings account, that's required. And we have that level because property taxes, we don't have that cash for 4 months of property taxes. And so we have that contingency to cover those 4 months without it. Without that, you're talking about having trouble paying your bills, potentially your free cash flow that's available. And not only that, but once you go under that, that means your operational growth is at a point where it's going to be very hard to get back to that contingency level without having to make, drastic cuts, as opposed to just slowing the increase rate there. And to point this out, we have here in fiscal year 35, the operational expenditure growth surpasses the general fund revenue. And the county takes on approximately $700,000 of unfunded operations in the general fund as fiscal year 36 starts. But by fiscal year 39, speaking to that compounded growth and the fact that we've maxed out our tax revenue, that unfunded liability number has grown to $5 million. So in 3 years, it's just compounded. By FY 43, you can see that without slowing down growth or finding new revenue sources, we'd be 50 million under. Getting net working capital obviously isn't possible. We'd have to make drastic changes before then. And that negative 50 million includes that contingency number. So we're really negative 30 million to hit zero, and another 20 million to hit the contingency requirement at that time. I don't know, Robert, do you have anything you want to?
Yeah, it's probably just reiterating the same thing that Dan just said, but that yellow line is contingency is where we're supposed to be at a minimum. And we can't go negative, which the red bars represent. So It's really, you can just see that gap continues to grow and grow. And these slides are based on, again, the projections, based on our historical projections. So if we continue on the same spending patterns and revenue patterns that we have, you can see where we're going to run into some issues quick. And we want to avoid the situation where we have to have a $50 million reduction in cost, or unless we received a $50 million in 1 year revenue source in fiscal year 43 as the example. So because of the compounding nature of expenditures, that's the challenge here.
Shows that it drops quick, that's what that shows,
Yes.
right? I mean, you slowly dealing with it, but all of a sudden, boom.
Once you've used all your savings, you're no longer contributing to a contingency or a reserve, and you have to start using your savings account. This shows we used all our savings account, now we're living off our credit cards.
Yeah.
Right?
And then it drops back.
And of course, as a government, we can't do that, and we won't do that.
We're talking about 64% of Americans today.
Exactly.
No, it's a nightmare.
Yes.
I feel so badly what inflation has done to the middle and lower classes. They are really, they're struggling.
It's survival.
I know.
Well, I mean, the other layer to this is, thinking about the amount of debt we're going to take on for the courthouse. It's not living on our credit card, but it's racking up a big mortgage. Right. Right.
You're committed to an asset, at least again, according to FOIA, at least that isn't an asset that we'll have and use, but we do have to pay for it. It's a commitment. That is correct.
And that's something to remember as we go through these slides. I'll point it out, but this is a pretty major scenario where the general fund can no longer pay for its own operations. Historically, the general fund pays for other departments, operations, other capital maintenance. And not once throughout this entire presentation will you see any of the available funds that we talk about coming back or flowing back in to help this. That's a separate issue from the debt and capital maintenance that we are talking about. So, all right. So we came up with some reasons, obviously, for declining available general funds. On the expenditure side, there's obviously the 8.2% year average expenditure growth since 2018, while only maintaining a 5.5% property tax increase over the same period. As Commissioner Bone said, part of that is going to be the max COLA. Part of that is we have personnel increases, 5% steps that everyone gets as long as you have an acre max. And the other part of it, frankly, is that the county FTE has grown from about 1,022 to about 1,234 since 2018. That's about a 4% year over year growth average. Now, the county's population as a whole has grown at about 1.9%, about 2%. So we're growing at about double the rate in terms of our FTE internally as the county's population. And so keep in mind that those are, Commissioner. Keep in mind that that because of that growth, that growth to catch up to the need, and then that max COLA, those are the historical expenditure assumptions that we're putting in here. And certainly if there was any kind of slowing of that growth, that would help. And I don't mean cutting, I just mean just not adding as many FTE that they have general fund.
So right now we have 110 unfilled. So, but 8 of those are from 911, and 911 is clearly under,
Staff.
FTE. Yeah, the
Yeah.
staffing is really frightening because of the burnout and the critical nature of their job. So I mean, I look at that and I think, okay, so what if we really seriously think about eliminating all the unfilled positions?
Well, and again, the focus here is on our discretionary funds, like the general fund, which really we focus a lot on NTRT, the unallocated, how it all feeds in. But a number of our funds are our dedicated funds, special revenue funds, or enterprise funds that have their own funding source outside of the general fund. So they may have funding sources. So like I think 911 does have their tax that can pay for their position. So in that case, that wouldn't make sense to not fill those positions. But if we're looking at positions that impact the general fund, that's where we may want to take a deeper look into some of those, or indirect costs, ISF costs that would hit that. Or if there's a cost in the departments that does receive funding from the general fund, look at those positions, or the transfer to that, because maybe we can't commit to that long term.
or even some of the enterprise funds that are, it's tougher economic times that are going to be CDD that could be facing challenges, or the Fair and Expo in terms of funding their capital reserve over the long term, they could potentially face some challenges as we look at that. So
because in that past scenario, I'm sorry, after that, the previous graph, in the scenario where other departments would typically call upon the general fund, the discretionary fund, to help them, assist them, bail them out, to help provide temporary funding until they get back to their business cycle, the general fund wouldn't have those available funds to assist them if we continued on that same expenditure path without slowing it.
I had a couple of questions about the FTE growth. Number one, I'm wondering if you could project that backwards for us. So for this time period, 2018 to the present day, percentage, staff, the FTE has grown at a rate larger than population growth. But was that the case for the 5 years before? Or
2018 to
is
2012.
some of this like catch up, basically?
Yeah.
To kind of right size our staffing to the size of the community. And also Robert was just saying, okay, well, you look at 911, those are employees that are, being salaries are being paid out of the 911 district or levy, and then so that's separate than what we're talking about for the general fund. There are other departments where they've added positions that are grant funded positions. So we kind of need to keep that in mind as well. I mean, there's FTE growth, just because one of our departments is very innovative and entrepreneurial and is doing stuff that is so effective and impactful that the state and the federal government want to fund it. We don't want to penalize ourselves by saying like we can never add more FTE, because that just deprives us of state and federal money and deprives us of opportunities to do innovative work that hopefully is having a great impact for our community.
I would just also offer, comparing FTE growth to population is one factor, but there's also been an increase in second homes. And so that's development activity, for example, that's not reflected in population growth. And then if we actually look at visitor growth, that's if TRT is the surrogate for that, you can see that other factors in the sheriff's office would certainly confirm that, just in terms of growth, in terms of impacts on services. So tying it to population is one factor, but there are other factors as well. So it's.
A quarter of the issues are from the tourists.
And that continues to.
Yeah, we see it in the traffic court, we see it in the courts. Yeah, it's definitely there is a cost.
Yeah, and regardless, of how you tie it, I think these are just the historical things. We had a massive FTE growth, we've had large COLAs, and the big picture is that in the forecast, if we were to continue going at that rate, and our revenues were to continue going at that rate without finding substantial revenues, we wouldn't be able to cover that. Some other things were, when we bargain for retiree health insurance and certifications, they have down the line costs, obviously. The health fund, benefits fund, we've had increased claims. We imagine that'll probably have about a $400,000 kind of transfer effect into the general fund, because that will affect all the general fund departments as well as all the departments that receive transfers from the general fund. We've had supply chain issues, inflationary increases, unforeseen emergency capital maintenance during this time. Health services had to have a new roof and HVAC, and of course PERS. The PERS biennial rate was fairly low this last time, but I would imagine PERS, like Social Security and every other fund, is going to be playing catch up here pretty soon, and we could maybe see those rates increase even further. We do have a PERS reserve though that can take some of that. And then from a revenue perspective, our guaranteed revenue sources such as property taxes they're just not growing with our expenditures. The FY24 property tax is projected at 4.9% assessed value growth. due to the decrease in permitting. But really important, the fiscal year 24 clerk's revenue is projected to be down 1.7 million since fiscal year 21. And that is also due to the higher interest rates affecting new mortgage rates, inflation essentially. There's less fees being processed. And assessor's revenue is budgeted 500,000 below FY22 actuals. So we had a couple of healthy years there of really increasing fees and grants, and we're not seeing that at this point in time. So that's kind of our general fund operations overview. We'll get back to that later when we talk about all of our available funds again, but just want to do a quick overview of the courthouse funding scenario. We estimate the cost to be around $40.5 million. We would issue a full faith and credit bond for that 40.5, assuming a true interest cost of 5.075%, which leaves us about an annual debt service about 3.2 million every year for 20 years, for a total of 65 million. And that annual debt service would have to be funded by prior and current years unallocated transient room tax revenue, which is what the board decided to do in fiscal year 23. We did send over $3.5 million for that. All future years unallocated transient room tax revenue would have to go to a prior and current years general fund, future years general fund, until, as we've seen, it kind of runs out in 33 to 34. And monitoring the growth rate. If we have a, if the growth rate, especially in the general fund and the departments that are affected by the general fund is just a little bit slower, then we can extend how long that general fund available cash is used for debt, for capital maintenance, for operations. So, but without significant deviations from the model assumptions or significant state funding, all countywide TRT and available general funds is needed to pay for the courthouse debt. So we'll kind of go over that here shortly. We'll move into the transient room tax and just do a quick overview there. Transient room tax, otherwise known as TRT, is predominantly funds tourism promotion and facilities and the provision of general government services with the unallocated TRT. It's broken up into 3 different levies: the 6% levy, which is 80% unallocated. Historically, it's been used to fund internal operations and also recently for some external projects for Sun River, Mount Bachelor, and the Deschutes Trails Coalition. We also have 20% allocated to tourism promotion through Visit Central Oregon, 1% fully allocated to Visit Central Oregon, formerly known as Central Oregon Visitors Association. And then we have a new 1% here. 70% of that is allocated to the Fair and Expo for marketing and tourism. We do have 30% unallocated, which has historically been used to support the Fair and Expo capital maintenance reserve. Those buildings are coming on 20 years. They need a pretty healthy reserve to make sure that those are foundationally strong. And I think we don't know if I think we're underfunded there, but we've been funding that 30% every single year historically to the Fair and Expo. One thing to say is TRT is highly variable and difficult to forecast. So this is kind of the best straight shot that we can do. It's a simple forecast, but it is hard. And as Robert said today, it's been going down the last 4 months. And that's why we're budgeting it at about 12.6 million. We think that in fiscal year 24, that could be kind of a new baseline. Whether that's because of the economic situations that we're facing or because of COVID with the limited travel, people weren't flying as much, they're doing in-state travel, so we might have seen an increase there in kind of internal Oregon tourism. But anyways, our projection assumes 2.5 revenue and expenditure growth on this graph.
So that's actually only 400,000 less than this year. If it was set, we projected it at 13 million for TRT.
That is correct.
Okay, so just down 400. Okay.
Yeah, we're not projecting it. I think the lowest that we saw might be if we had these same trends for 12 months that we've had the last 4, it was like 12.2, 12.1, but we're hoping to have some stability and land around the 12.6 area. So on this graph, we have the revenue is the line, and then the multicolored bars there are the expenditures. And we assume a 2.5% revenue and expenditure growth on the expenditures that are affected, such as the unallocated expenditures. As you know, Visit Central Oregon and the Fair and Expo, those allocated TRT are based off of how much revenue we bring in. So This gray bar down here is the unallocated internal operations. It includes transfers to the sheriff's office, health services, justice court, and administrative costs. We realize that we haven't always bumped it at a COLA or 2.5%, but often folks come back later and say, we need a fee increase, we need more of an operational subsidy and kind of get a larger bump at some point in time. But when we look at this, we've also included the debt here, the debt services, the green bar. And when we look at this, the TRT does not actually cover the debt in the early years. You can see the revenue bar is just a little bit underneath the debt there. It would need to be covered by available general funds, which, as we looked at already, kind of those available general funds we project to be going down a little bit. But when TRT revenue surpasses expenditures out in FY33, FY34, that also happens to be in conjunction with when the general fund is projected to have no available funds at this growth rate. So things that the general fund available cash normally funds, mandatory maintenance, operations would have to be covered then by a different available source, which is frankly probably TRT. And so that's something to remember, that as this revenue bar starts looking pretty nice, it's actually going to have to take on potentially other expenditures just in the capital maintenance and capital projects that the general fund usually does, but not necessarily even talking about taking on the general fund operations itself, the departmental shortfalls. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about there is a belief that TRT is going to start increasing again, at this rate in the future. And I've been thinking about the kind of stalling or flattening out of TRT in the last few months, and I think we should be prepared for the possibility that we've saturated already. Like that there's a certain amount of guest lodging, and if you build more and you try to bring more people here, there's just not enough experiences, tourist experiences for people to have that's fun. That like you could reach a point of overcrowding. So I want to understand how much of the increase that you project is based on in anticipation that more lodging units are coming online versus just the price of the lodging units is going to increase.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think when we looked at this TRT forecast, I think I used a more simple approach, which was that prior to 2000, I think it was like 17 or 18, it was just very steady. TRT was just a 2.5%, just growing from all the way back from like 2005. And then you had a jump up to 9 million. And then all of a sudden you had a jump up to 13 million, within it with those COVID years. So it was like a $4 million jump. But prior to that, I've been very, very steady at about that 2.5%. I think that's part of the difficulty of projecting TRT. We could certainly look into, because I know we're not planning on maybe having more resort type locations here, and TRT might be affected by that. But I think when we looked at the trend line prior to some of these, what I would consider to be kind of unstable COVID-like events, it was at 2.5%. So, but again, that may not be the best way, and we're happy to look at it different ways too. I think one of the things about TRT is even if it grows a lot, part of that is going to be unallocated, but part of it is going to be an increase in Visit Central Oregon and kind of ORS contracts, increase in Fair and Expo, and those sorts of things. So there certainly would be a free amount there. But if the board has more direction to look at different types of analysis, we can certainly do that.
I guess I'm just wondering whether a little bit more conservative assumption about revenue and expenditure growth might be safer.
Yeah, we did have multiple conversations, multiple iterations of this, and as Commissioner Adair pointed out, we are already projecting the starting point to be lower than what we ended up this year because of the recent trend.
What we think we're gonna end up.
Where we think, right? Because they're all estimates and projections, right? So there's a lot of numbers that can change. And that's these presentations and long-term forecast is different than what we thought it was even 4 months ago, right? Because we have new and more information. Once we know, and the goal is whenever there's major decisions, like for example, don't want to get ahead of the slides, but if we find out we get funding from the state, how will that impact our forecast? How will this change? If we get a year into this and now we have an experience of TRT and we know what it is, a year from now, well, that's going to change this model and we're still going to project out 20 years plus, but how does it impact it then? Once contracts are settled, bargaining unit negotiations, how does that impact the general fund? So there'll be triggers when we'll be updating this, of course, annually for the mid-year budget, annually for the budget as well. But we're going to be doing that internally as well to try to guard off or save off that push off that future year where there's not enough general fund.
Question, Dan. You have blue for Fair and Expo, and then you have blue for Sun River and Mount Bachelor.
Yeah.
Are they the same blue?
They are slightly different. One's a navy and one's more of a royal, but either way, it's not good at data practice. It should have been a more distinguished color.
Well,
Yeah.
I know, that's what I was thinking. One was a teeny bit darker, but then when I got it to the chart, I was having a hard time.
Yeah,
So
right. And so that's another thing you'll see with this.
maybe you could do a different color, like pink next time.
I like that. I'll go with that next time. And I think the Sun River and Mount Bachelor, those are basically represent our external TRT obligations at this point. You'll see in the assumptions, we don't have any other, there are folks asking for TRT, but we don't have any more TRT obligations in the future projected here for this.
Thank goodness. Those are the only two we have.
Yes. at
I
this
mean,
point in time,
biggies.
given the forecast, right? So moving on here, I'm going to talk about available funds versus forecasted expenditures. And this graph is one of the ones that's slightly changed, and I'll explain that. The forecasted available funds, as I looked at them, they were pulling in incorrectly on part of the TRT. It only was a couple $1 million difference over the course of 25 years. But so this graph is slightly different now. In FY38 now, we're seeing the crossover between the forecasted funds and expenditures. And again, those funds are going to be the general fund, the future TRT, plus the LATCF ARPA funds at this point in time. That's what are identified in this. And then the forecasted expenditures would be minimal capital debt and capital maintenance. And now I'm going to go through kind of the available funds year over year, and then the cumulative look of the available funds, and then do the same with the forecasted expenditures, and all questions are welcome. So this is the annual forecast of all available funds. You're going to see that this has changed from your packet significantly. The TRT has changed. The TRT was not correct, and I apologize. So we've changed that. But in FY24, that lighter blue bar is the prior and current year general fund. So that's the general fund that we've saved from all the previous years. It's about 6.1 million, and that assumes maximum tax levy increase. There's about $4.2 million in TRT right there. 3.5 again was from last year's decision, 700,000 going back into the TRT at the end of this year. And then lastly, there's those one-time LATCF funds of 4.6 million. And so that's kind of where we're at right now with all of our available funds around the county. We don't expect to have more LATC funds or state funds or anything else. So we're really then back to kind of future general fund and future TRT. We've been through that future general fund projection, and this shows it, ending in fiscal year 33, 34, just like the other projections. And then TRT has some available cash, and that actually grows over time, just like we saw as you hit 45. A couple of things about this forecast. The general fund available funds is shown as funds remaining after operations, but before it would normally fund capital maintenance or capital projects in Fund 070 or 463. The TRT that is shown available now is all the TRT before debt service payments. So in this way, it's slightly different than the last graph that showed it with debt service payments. For instance, debt service in fiscal year 25 is $3.2 million. And the TRT amount sitting here is only 2.7. So that would be kind of a deficit that year that the general fund would need to pick up. Any questions on the available funds forecast or additional comments? Okay. So now we're going to look at the cumulative, and this is the cumulative of all those funds stacked on top of each other. So this is our forecast of all our available funds essentially within FY45. And you can see by the time you get out to FY45, this is also slightly changed from, you're up to $108 million in total revenue. And a large portion of that is that TRT. And as Commissioner Chang said, you know, if TRT didn't keep growing, then that would affect this, negatively affect this forecast significantly. Now let's take a look at the expenditures that we're going to be expending against with those available funds. Debt and capital expenditures. The forecast shows the courthouse debt service. That's going to be the blue bar. 1.9 million in fiscal year 24, which is half of the annual debt amount plus the fees for going out for the bond, and then continuing at 3.2. The minimum capital maintenance projected may actually be a little bit low. It's a 2.5% increase year over year. And the minimal capital projects, again, is for FTE growth in the future, or for for any kind of, like the AJ Tucker building, if you need some kind of expansion or something, just to fit staff. I'm not talking about huge things like public safety campus or even a new building like that. And so these are the expenditures that available funds will need to cover at a minimum. It does not include, as I've spoken to before, the general fund unfunded operations after fiscal year 34 that we saw at the beginning of this. So at this point, you know, I think I said in FY39 that the general funds, based on these models, would need $5 million. You know, that's not in here. If that was the case in FY39, this annual bar, instead of being 6 million, it would be 11 million, right? So going forward, we look at our debt and capital expenditures forecast, the cumulative view. This is just like we looked at the funds, except it's stacking all the expenditures. These are our projected minimum expenditures through FY45, including courthouse debt. Come up with 120 million over that time period. And again, it does not include the general fund unfunded operations after fiscal year 34. Any questions or comments or any of the available funds or expenditures? Yeah.
Long time ago, when we were talking about how much money we were going to have to borrow, with this was back when Greg Munn was even still here. He said, you know, you borrow this money at this point in time where interest rates are not so super favorable, and hopefully you're going to have a chance to refinance. Essentially, like I forget what it's called.
Yeah,
when you're talking about bonds.
So refunding.
Yep. But I mean, can you give us has an assumption like that been built in here that at some point in time we'll refund this, and B, if it hasn't, then what is the probability that actually we will have an opportunity like that?
Most bonds are set up, Commissioner, through the question, most bonds are set up, even 20-year bonds, after 10 years, you can refund. Currently, we can't do advance refundings prior to 10-year with change in law, but after 10 years, you can refund it or call all the bonds. Usually there's an opportunity for that. This model did not include any options or reductions of, and it also assumes no state funding at this level too, because none of that is guaranteed, right? And we don't know if rates would be favorable in 10 years or not. They could be more favorable, they could be less, right? We would hope they'll be down. I mean, that's the trend, we would hope. But we would look at those options at any point. We are still assuming on the 5.075 interest rate for the bond. But the other thing we'll be looking at, which Dan will get to, I'm like, where are we at in this? We'll talk these were about no buy down of the debt, so we're not having contributions for that. if we know there are funds for sure that we'll dedicate towards this, we'll redo that analysis and see how it impacts us. But until, like, for example, from the state, until we hear from the state, we're not assuming we're receiving their funding, because we need to budget conservatively and make sure we can meet our commitment even without that state fund.
Yeah, as Robert said, it's not projected in this model, but we certainly could, assuming that the rate in 10 years will be better.
Because internally, we did look at some numbers, what would it look like if we had some of that funding, sorry. Some of those scenarios, but again, speaking in the absence of definitive confirmation, we can't.
We'll know
budget
after our
that way.
budget week,
Exactly.
like maybe a couple of weeks after. Or maybe before.
Yeah, I mean, just, Representative Crop is the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. He didn't think that there would be a lot. So I think it's, our $20 million ask, just based on what I've heard, like, I wouldn't be banking on that.
I think everywhere, government institutions, private institutions are feeling the stress on their budget right now. I think the good thing about this is we're a little bit ahead of it. We're looking at, how can we make maybe some decisions to kind of offset some of this. It's not happening right now. So, obviously we're going to overlay, this is your available funds versus your forecasted expenditures. We're going to overlay those two numbers on top of each other. And you can see that our expenditures outpaced all of our available revenue by fiscal year 38. So what that means that in this model, without some changes to operational growth or finding new revenue sources, we would not be able to pay for the courthouse through FY 44. We would be about 6 years short here. Or we would pay for the courthouse, but we wouldn't meet our capital maintenance, our capital projects, or maybe even our operations. And again, this does not include the general fund unfunded operations after fiscal year 34. That's kind of a separate issue, only related based on the amount of the available funds that it brings in. So yeah, this is kind of the crux of it, is that when we look at it with this 4.9% AV growth out for 20 plus years, we look at our historical expenditures, we're not able to meet our courthouse debt without significant increases in revenue or infusions in revenue, or a slowing down of operational growth. Also in this, we haven't included, this is kind of the bare minimum projection. We haven't included other county priorities. Some of those would be increased operational subsidies to multiple departments. We're thinking probably FY 25 based on some of the budget meetings outside of the general fund, who are currently facing declining revenues. And those could be large amounts. The county's portion of the long-term funding of the Office of Coordinated Houselessness after fiscal year 2025. I don't think there's any identified funding for that. With the impacts grant not being there, the stabilization center funding and its operation. And then of course, kind of the second phase of the public safety campus improvements, looking for funding for that. So those are kind of the top priorities. There's other ones that come to mind too, but those would be kind of major funding sources. We would need to make a priority commitment to fund year over year for the most of these for some time.
With this model that you've done it on the 40.5 million, correct?
Correct.
Okay, what about reducing it by the 4.6 million that we are knowing we are going to receive from the ARPA funding that we'd said?
Oh, this did include, so it's still in the $40.5 million construction, but in the available funds, it did include the 4.6 million of the LATCF ARPA funds.
It reduced the 40. Or you said
Yes,
that was 45?
it would have reduced the 40. We're not, so this model doesn't have the buy down of the 40. This model right here was at the 40.5, but included the LATCF funds as like part of a general reserve of available funds that could pay annual debt. But you can, and that's the next slide we're going to get to, is you can use those funds to pay down the debt. And that would be we did model that. We didn't go through all the graphs, but I'll show you that right now. So actually more than 4.6 million, we looked at a $10 million debt buy down.
Right,
Yeah,
okay, next page.
yeah, yeah. Hey, thank you. You led us straight into it. Thank you, Commissioner Day.
Well, I'm going like, come on, guys, we've got something to put
Oh,
down.
but that, you just set pace for the whole thing, you know, if we didn't have any of these other variables, this is it.
And we do have all the graphics to show this model, but we didn't do it here, but 5.4 million would be used from general county reserve, 4.6 million LATCF funds. It would essentially save us about 6.2 million in interest costs over the life of the debt service. However, even when we do this model with the same assumptions, it does fail to meet the debt service obligations in fiscal year 42. So it's a few years out without, again, additional revenue sources or a reduction in growth expenditures.
So
Well, maybe the interest rates will be better by then and we could be,
That's true.
absolutely,
Yeah.
that's what
or
we're.
maybe they'll be worse and we'll be thankful we got this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And to answer your question, expand on that a little more, Commissioner, there is, as Dan just mentioned, we did run this scenario. The graphs would essentially look the same. As he mentioned, the only difference is it pushes it out to fiscal year 42. So the trend lines on all of the graphs we would have shown are the same, just the year that they cross is different.
Yeah.
So because that 4.6 was included in that first available graph, and he pointed, I think it was blue or whatever color, maybe one of the blues. That's why it was so high in that first fiscal year, because it included that funding. So we didn't make you sit through all the graph changes again, but we wanted to point out they would look the same. It just pushes
Thank
it
you so
out
much.
a little.
Yeah. Yeah, you're gonna get another 4 years.
Yeah.
If you go that route. And
So we're
so,
talking about a 20-year debt repayment, so that's getting it repaid up to 18 years, so we're short 2 years. And surely by then, things are gonna be different.
much closer, yeah, you definitely, this funding scenario is definitely closer to getting the debt covered. So, and this annual debt service would be funded by the same thing, unallocated room tax revenue and the remaining general fund revenue, as long as it is going, and of course monitoring that growth rate.
And one last comment, or another comment while I switch slides, is the courthouse funding is a separate issue from the structural imbalance for the general fund. So at the very beginning, we started with general fund revenues and general fund expenditures. That was not counting the debt. So they're related because they feed into each other for funding sources. But the structural imbalance between revenues and expenditures is separate from the funding for the debt, although very related.
Right. So, we've been looking at it for a while. We have some considerations and tried to show some of those infographics that can help with these decision-making. One of them would be levying the county's full tax rate. Obviously, that goes back to the graph where we showed the available general funds and the dashed green bar going down if we didn't raise it to the full levy of $1.2783 per $1,000 of assessed value. The consideration would be deferring any new TRT allocations until we know if we're going to have state funding, how much that state funding is. We can do an analysis of that. Slowing operational growth countywide and within the general fund, especially until inflation decreases, and projected assessed value growth of property tax returns to higher numbers. Again, we did speak with some experts that felt like there was a good chance that property tax wasn't going to return back to 5.5 anytime soon, or maybe in the future due to the growth. Buying down $10 million courthouse debt to save on financing costs. We just showed that you may make it another 4 years that way, and consider changing revenue allocations from other sources and redirect to the general fund, the courthouse funding. Specifically looking at the way we look at PILT. Potentially, we have $2.5 million of former general fund that's sitting in property management for mid-year land or property acquisitions that could be used also for the court or for really any general fund related activity. And so those might be some things that we bring to the proposed budget as, decisions for the board if you want to look at that. All right.
Now we come to the really interesting dilemma.
The rest of it wasn't, this is it.
No, I meant the county, the health.
The health benefits.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, before we leave off of that, I mean, I have a couple questions and some
Sure.
comments. The $400,000 of ARPA, $412,000 of general ARPA money that we have remaining. Is there any, what kind of restrictions are there on that would prohibit us from using it for the courthouse or for something else?
I think that's a rather gray area. I think our first assessment based on the interim final rule was certainly that we could not, because of our TRT increase and our other revenue growth, we could not use that funding. Then the final rule came out and said you can use it. We felt a little strange about it, given the fact that we had already kind of testified twice online that we couldn't use it because of our extra revenue. However, that being said, I think legally and technically, it probably could be used. It just is a little strange. Yeah.
So if we're trying to get to a $10 million buy down, that is another potential piece, puzzle piece.
Yes, I would say that the PILT, the property, the money sitting property management that was formerly from the general fund reserve. And then there's some other, I mean, certainly up to board discretion, but the unallocated 30% of the 1% for the Fair and Expo, their capital reserve probably isn't where it needs to be for capital maintenance, but also it is unallocated TRT revenue. And then there might be a couple other smaller sources here and there.
The other thing that came to mind while we were discussing just kind of the general setting the courthouse aside, expenditures outstripping general fund revenue over time. It would be great to have an analysis of departments, positions that where we're essentially cost sharing with the state. From the DA's, like the DA himself, but the fact that the state doesn't pay anything for deputy DAs is baffling to me. Community justice, health services, all of these departments where we're essentially jointly delivering services with the state. It would be really helpful to have a better understanding of where those, I would call them opportunities are, to really kind of focus our advocacy with the state legislature might be in the future to get more, essentially more of the cost of the staff that are delivering delivering the services that the state and the county want to be delivering, to see if we can get a little bit more of the those staff costs covered by the state end of the equation. So I don't know what that looks like in terms of an analysis, but maybe we could do that at some point for legislative advocacy. It's irrelevant at this point, probably for this legislative session, but before the next one.
Right.
Well, that's where AOC can come in too, because this is going to be common across all counties. Some of these base services, and that's one of the mantras. Is or mantras is no funded service mandates, but the growth in costs here that aren't being picked up by the state is the flip side.
But that hasn't historically been the way that we focus our advocacy with AOC or with our lobbyists. So I mean, if we I think it would be great to have a little bit more fiscally targeted advocacy in mind for the future. two of the questions. And, you know, looking at this slide, I just, it's a little bit crying over spilled milk, but I mean, I do want to say that if we had not reduced our assessed property tax rates 6-7 years ago, we would have $10 million plus in capital reserves right now, and we wouldn't be having to make these very hard choices. We'd be able to buy down like the debt, $20 million potentially, and that would save us. I think I saw that, you know, for every $10 million you take off this debt, you save $6 million of debt service, and I think that's really unfortunate that we're in that position. And you know, I don't think it was fiscally responsible at the time, and I think that the decisions not to dial up the assessed property tax rate in the last 2 years, last two budget cycles, has also not been fiscally responsible.
Well, the good news is we did do, 13 million for PERS, maybe in 1920, and the state did a quarter match to that funding, so I thought that was really excellent news. And my property taxes actually went up, I think 8 or 9% last year, just in 1 year, with all the other levies that are being approved in this county. So I hear from a lot of people that, you know, they're very aware of every little bill going up.
Yeah, that 6 cents per thousand, probably when it was instituted, maybe would have maybe saved me $10 a year on my property taxes. And at this point, maybe $15 a year. So, but what it has cost the county in terms of future debt service is pretty egregious.
Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So moving on to the health benefits forecast for the health and benefits fund. And Commissioner Chang, we'll look into if there's any operational state funding for those positions.
Yeah, well, just understanding, like having a look at our staffing and really understanding what are the departments, what are the positions where it's state money and county money and county
Mixed
general
together.
fund both mixed together, because those I think are real opportunities for us. And you know, as was covered earlier, there are whole departments of county staffing that you know, don't have anything to do with the general fund. So we don't need to be worrying about the 911 that, you know, covering the salaries of 911 workers. I mean, we need to worry about finding them, but we don't need to worry about covering their costs out of the district if you know, if you can hire them.
All right. Oh, did you want to say something, Commissioner Derrick?
No, I was just looking at the health benefits fund analysis.
And we have
And the fact that you've got this line going up and then you've got an arrow coming down and Kathleen's here.
Yeah, so I think, you know, the idea was to spend down the reserves because we had a large reserve policy. And we successfully did that, I think would be one way of putting it.
You could say we did it.
Yeah.
Goal achieved.
Yeah, but I think what happened was, you know, the claims obviously really increased rapidly, or decreased the funds ending balance by 4 million in FY22. We were not expecting that. I think from what I can gather, our consultants told us, hey, there's no need to budget at that claims level in fiscal year 23 because that was a pent up COVID demand kind of claimed. We're going to see it drop back down. Actually, we haven't seen that.
Any day now.
Yeah, we've seen an increase, and so this looks to be much more like new normal. We're expecting to have a decrease in, you know, contingency of $5.8 million in fiscal year 23. So we'll need to increase the rates by 11% in fiscal year 24, and we'll need to substantially increase the rates in FY25 to meet the claims cost. And I think, just so the board knows, when we met and kind of came up with the 11% number for FY24, we were still being told that those claims were going to come back down any day. And I think we just kind of decided those claims aren't coming back down.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, real quick commentary on that. When we look at our prior
average increases just on the claims cost alone, which is the major driving factor to the increase in this. We're averaging about 3.5% increase year over year, but we would budget expecting about a 4.5, just to be more conservative. What we're actually experiencing now, given that year and a half of claims, is a 10.8% increase of over the past 5 years. So with one of those years in particular being a 29% increase, and that was that year of sort of a crescendo of costs hitting at that one time. So we are experiencing that. And the other piece I would say is that the increase, we have increased lives covered on our plan now with the additional staffing. And so those are, while that does add to the revenue, it also does increase our claims as well. So it's kind of that compounding thing. And then the cost per claim has gone up. The inflation to medical cost is greater than the inflation that we're seeing elsewhere.
Yeah, and it's not a bad thing to add FTE to the plan as long as that cost per claim stays stable and the revenue balances the expenditures. It's when we're behind on that, we have that progressive decrease in fund balance, I think, due to increased claims costs. And as we talked about, we had to slightly increase from FY22. They've grown since FY23. Like Kathleen said, they do appear to be the new baseline. We are facing inflation and rising medical costs as well. Early analysis shows the county will need to raise rates by 23% in FY25 to adjust to new claims levels, and then hold flat for some time. And you can see on this graph, the blue bar there is the ending fund balance, and we really want to see a reserve that can take on about 25% of the projected claims. And I came up with that number because we've lost $6 million basically in fund balance in 1 year before, which was about 25% of our claims. And so we never want to be hit with that out of nowhere, because then we'd have a negative fund balance and we'd have to subsidize it with general fund or TRT, which we don't want. So the suggestion right now is raise the rate by 23% in FY25. Because that is an increased personnel expenditure to departments, that would increase the overall pressure on the general fund by $400K per year, but that it was modeled in the previous assumptions in this. So that's not something that wasn't in there, so we do that. Any more thoughts on health benefit funds forecast?
Is the $400,000 general fund pressure, the cost, 11% or 23%?
That is the 23%.
So we're talking about 11% for this proposed budget coming right now?
Yep, and that's already been factored in.
Yep.
So,
just making sure.
Yeah.
I'm curious, with this 11%, then the 23% and the increase, is the costs of coverage per employee and are the premiums that our employees are paying, how do they compare to what deals other people are getting out in other parts of the economy? I mean, I know we have a great plan that in terms of coverage, but like in terms of total cost and cost to premium costs to employees, like does this now make it suddenly like, wow, you got a good plan, but you're paying a lot of money for it? Or does this make it, now you're just like everybody else? Because I mean, it seemed like for a while we were in a place where we were charging people pretty modest premiums. They were getting great coverage, and because nobody was making any claims, we were building up our reserves.
Yeah. So I would say a couple of comments on that. We do benchmarking on our plan nearly annually. We are competitive in our plan design. In fact, I would say that we have a pretty generous plan design. And so there's potentially some areas to where we could even look to reduce costs there, that would be cuts to the employee costs. The other component, which I think what if I'm understanding the question correctly, is the employees' cost share, so their premium that they're paying. When we look at that comparatively, we charge one rate for, regardless of the number of people, right? So if it's a single person or if it's someone with, 12 dependents, unlimited dependents, really, right? It's $90 a month. And that is where we're not competitive. In fact, we're more competitive, right? In that we are offering a very generous benefit to those with families. Individuals, though, we're kind of at that, we're a little bit high. And so actually one of the things that we are evaluating is, and the board will likely hear from us in some time, it's a recommendation to split that and look at a tiered system so that we can look at increasing cost shares as our costs continue to rise.
One thing to point out additionally, thank you, is the increases are the increases to departmental costs that's reflected here. So these are not, as Kathleen mentioned, the flat rate that's charged to employees. These rates are referring to the cost charged to departments, the full cost, which is separate from the employee premium share that they pay.
And is there an assumed premium increase in all of this, or?
Yeah.
Do we really want this fund to go down below 5 million in 24?
No, I mean.
No, we don't. I mean, just a couple of really horrible things and that could wipe it out. Really, quite easily, actually, in today's world. I mean, you hear about horrible things all the time.
I think we try to budget higher in FY 24 certainly, and we just said we're gonna budget it growing. But also by the time, we kind of realized this was happening, I think we would have had to redo the whole budget in the last couple of weeks. Because this offsets, if we were to raise the rate more than 11% of fiscal year 24, it would have to increase everybody's departmental general fund, everybody's ISF and everybody's personnel cost. So, but I think that's a good point. Yeah, under 5 million doesn't feel great. I think we tried to budget.
It feels frightening is what it feels.
Right, so.
Vulnerable, frightening, and not realistic.
And the reality is if we did take another hit of 5 or 6 million, we would have to, that would leave that fund underwater by $1 million or so. We would have to transfer in some of that general fund to cover it. And then potentially the health benefits fund could pay that back in the future. But,
So that would be a big event if that really happened too.
Oh, it wouldn't take that
That'd
much
be
for it
the
to happen, though, I mean, honestly.
we're dropping about 5 million a year, so we're really.
I mean, I'm guessing you're doing some analysis of the the kind of abundance of new claims and like I know we have, wellness programs, EAP and all sorts of stuff. Like, is there, are there opportunities to kind of dissect what kind of claims are coming in and try to prevent, to do prevention work that is going to help avoid very large and abundant claims in the future?
Yeah, that's part of the analysis that we look at every year is what types of claims are coming in, where the cost is. And, what happened in that year where we saw the 29% increase was kind of a triple rate impact, is that we saw one really big claim hit our plan. And usually we see just one of these events happen, one really big claim, maybe a few large, medium claims hit, and sort of unprecedented inflation. But to have all of those in the 1 year, and then to see that not necessarily go down that next year was really the impact. So, in terms of preventing the one really large claim, that it's a claim in which prevention wouldn't have been an option. So it's really looking at that, in my opinion. I'm not sure we can do much with the inflationary costs, other than look at maybe tightening some of our contracts, looking at some of that stuff with our TPA. it's really that middle section of claims, which are things that maybe some intervention could help with, right? In terms of preventing claims down the road.
You wanna mention stop loss? We do have that helps.
We
but
do,
didn't
right.
get them or-
Yeah,
yet.
so we do have stop loss and we look at it annually. Our stop loss is, I think we're sitting at about 500,000 deductible, which is actually quite high. But when we have had our consultants do an evaluation for us annually and look at, okay, what would these claims have cost if we were at 400,000 or 450, 200, 300? And what we find is that for every dollar we spend in premium, because your premium goes up when you have a smaller deductible, we're actually better off being at the 500. In fact, we even looked at increasing it one time. I'm not sure if the board remembers. We looked at a 550,000 or a 600,000. Stop loss won't bid beyond 600. So for us, we're at the top of where they go, and we actually saw that our costs increased there as well. So we're sitting at a really kind of sweet spot in terms of that 500,000. But right now, for instance, we have an ongoing high cost claim that runs about $450,000. So it comes just under that, that we now anticipate to be an annual expense for us.
I mean, look at 1920 and 21, it was all about 15 million, the fund. And then, you know, one of the things of not going to the doctor like people should have been doing, and now we're really, it's the price is being paid.
And one thing I just want to mention, it was sort of interesting to when pulling all of this together, and looking at our claims cost and our reserve, and the impact to departments. While I understand this is an impact to departments, but the premium has not been increased since 2017. So departments have both held flat the premium, as well as even 1 year had a reduction in premium to right size to according to where we need it to be at that point. So, you know, if you think about it, from 2018 to present, only an 11% increase, and frankly, if we factor in a 23% increase over that, it's not, you know, it would be an interesting analysis to complete that, I think, when we look at year over year compared to the industry at that point.
Well, thank you very much. A lot to think about here. It really kind of sets the table for the big picture. A lot of variables in there, you know, that could, just like Commissioner Chang was, I was thinking the same thing, like, well, full district, what if you do that? And we could do that all day long, but this really sets the table on that. Interest in inflation, I mean, everything's moving right now. This is really, you know, it's valuable to have this snapshot because there's a lot of different parts. Thank you for focusing on the big capital step we're going to be taking here, plus understanding the long-term cost of your business. The FTE growth and the cost of healthcare, the whole big picture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry to throw one more huge question on the table, but is it too late to consider doing the courthouse on a bond measure? Like a voter, would it be a levy or would it be a bond measure?
Going to the voters for.
Yeah, it'd be a general obligation bond, which would require voter approval for that. And obviously, that's the board's decision to do that. I would say we do believe, as we're looking at funding sources based on how much we think we'll spend within this next fiscal year on the courthouse, we could have funds available during that first year, during fiscal year 24, if we can apply lactive funds, you know, pending approval, if we look at some sources, but it just depends on the timing. We haven't gone out for the bonds, regular bonds yet. Full faith and credit bonds is what we're going for as opposed to general obligation bonds.
I don't know the repercussions of a general obligation bond if it were to fail, given that we have Oregon Justice Department funds and judges and things of that nature. I mean, I guess you could always just see what happens and then pay for it with a full obligation as opposed to a general full faith and credit.
I mean, I've been hearing about the the courthouse plus that Benton County is working on. And they're going out for general obligation bond. It's just pretty bleak. And I mean, we're going from a place where, you know, we've never been cut all the way to the, you know, so close to the bone like as we're going to be in the next decade. If it wasn't too much work and if it could be done fairly quickly, you know, just sensing the public on their willingness to pay for a general obligation bond to make this courthouse happen. It's potentially a way to kind of improve the solvency of the county for the next 2 decades.
I was just gonna say to actually Commissioner DeBone's point, when we talk about inflation, those two, well, we did 5.5% last year, but max bargaining units, you know, when we're talking about $200 million in personnel across the county, you think about hypothetically a 4% increase in that, that's $8 million a year. And so that's just something to, once we hit those inflationary marks, we can't bring it back down. That's the new level plus the 5% step, plus PERS, plus the health benefits, plus certifications and incentives. And we can never, you know, drop that personnel number back down. So I think that's just one of the considerations as we go forward.
But I'd say I wouldn't use the word bleak. I mean, this is the business-like atmosphere of Deschutes County. We've got a long history of this. We've got public safety rates taking care of the sheriff's office. We can advocate to the state for you know, helping pick up some of the costs of operations of the DA's office, and we do a lot of contracts for the health department. So we're going to be able to get through this, but we need to do it with eyes wide open and you know, acknowledge where the costs are, where the escalations are. We're going to provide a great level of service for the people of Deschutes County. We just can't go overboard. Any other thoughts?
Not today.
Okay.
I said enough.
Thank you so much for the update. Very professional.
Welcome any follow-up questions as well, so. Sure.
Is there anything else for the meeting?
Couple, yeah, one quick check-in. Go ahead. Two. Go ahead.
We have 2 other items today. One is a funding request from CORE that Stephanie's gonna bring forward for the board's consideration. And the second is a follow-up from Friday's legislative meeting. There's a draft letter for the board's review, but I wanna, if the board would like to take a break or. Power through. I believe those
It's just those 2 things.
Yeah,
Let's
it's like
just
we
get
power
it.
through here, yeah.
We also have-
I don't think so.
Not today.
I'm supposed to be talking to CDD staff about code stuff, but like that was, I hope they know that.
5 minutes ago or 35 minutes?
Half an hour.
Yeah.
Do you want to continue? Do you want to
No.
reschedule?
No, let's get it done.
Yeah, okay.
I'll, yeah, they just threw that thing on my schedule, on my calendar without asking me, so that's what happened.
All right, so switching gears and going back to FY 23 for video lottery. Core Community Land Trust, they're hosting a fundraiser event this Thursday. They've asked Deschutes County to consider sponsoring the event. Sponsorship levels are $1,000, $2,500, or $5,000. The event is from 6 to 8 at Tefro Event Pavilion. It includes music, bar, appetizers, silent auction. Funds raised will help build more sustainable and affordable housing in Central Oregon. This would be funded out of video lottery, and I just come back to the board with a budget adjustment. And the board has funded Core Community Land Trust with a $500,000 ARPA grant fund, just as some background on funding.
But we haven't made any video lottery allocations to them.
No, just
we are-
Your fundraising.
Haven't we applied for one of their projects, and if we win, we have to pay like 2,500 or something? For,
Right,
Yeah.
that's right, yeah.
Cost if an employee was selected as,
Right.
I believe it's 7 homes are part of the initial pilot with the chamber. So if a county
Right.
employee was selected, then I think that is my understanding of our obligation.
It's $2,500 per, right, it's a lottery situation if I recall. Oh, yeah, Jim's right there.
Yes, that's correct, but they're not selecting until end of May, so we don't know yet.
Okay.
I know that they've had a lot of interest.
And that's different than whether we want to support a fundraising event or not, which is, we do a lot of. I would support making $1,000 fundraising allocation.
not more than 1,000.
So, yeah, I mean,
But is that support for 1,000?
1,000, no more.
okay, $1,000.
All right, perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Okay, other.
Yep, Jen has a letter.
Friday.
Letter of support, yeah.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that. So much.
Oh, good afternoon, Jen Patterson, Strategic Initiatives Manager. This is a letter of support for Senate Bill 847A. We discussed this briefly for a little bit during Friday's legislative update meeting. Commissioner Chang was the one who brought this up, so if you want to expand upon it.
I would just say, we've already made a request to the governor, to the legislature, and to DLCD to provide us some emergency shelter siting flexibility with, in the near-in environment to urban growth boundary areas. And this is just picking up from the letter we sent to the legislature in a very specific way, because Senate Bill 847 is the update renewal of House Bill 2006. So we tracked down that 847 is, basically they took a bunch of the language from HB 2006 and they just kind of cut and pasted it. And they hadn't changed the part where they say, there's emergency siting authority within urban growth boundaries and rural residential zone areas to include resource zone areas. So this is a request to do that.
Is safe parking used in other legislative bills? Because I just remember that Rick Russell pointed out that, watch out when using safe parking, because people have different visions about what does that really mean, So do you have a feel for that? And I'm supportive of the letter, but just the definition of safe parking.
Right.
Because we don't want people debating it in the end. Well, it's not what I meant.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would actually make it broader, outdoor shelter, or, some other term that's encompasses both safe parking and manage encampments, and maybe even like tiny house village.
So we're back to, a place for people, because there's different ways that people are gonna be.
And this is, again, all about, in my mind, this is all about the Gales property. We have a willing landowner that's like a stone throw away from St. Charles Hospital, stone throw away from, our health services main campus, who's willing to offer his property up. Neighbors that are totally comfortable with the
Well,
proposal.
so it's good we're talking about that, then. So something other than the word safe parking then. Appropriate.
Yeah, it's used 3 times in the one paragraph.
Because does it say safe parking means?
I mean, what did we, with that letter we wrote to our legislative delegation, did we use the term safe parking?
For the 2006 amendment, yeah, so this letter is almost identical to that. So this is the language we used for that particular letter.
Well, I'm sorry, sorry.
Yeah,
Scott,
we had
that's
this
earlier,
discussion about
but ideally, we would yeah, we would ask for something broader.
Like various shelter options or sheltering.
I mean, Kim, you kind of, you parsed through, you parsed through 2006. I mean, if we, can you work with Jen to come up with some
I
language?
can't, and I did, I know I had her take out the footnotes. I think the letter's broad enough, but I know that your underlying intent was to address SB 847 and that language change. That particular section, I don't think would apply to safe parking as currently drafted because it is limited to emergency shelter. And if you look at the definition of that, it's building or cluster of buildings. So I think the section of HB 2006 that we really need to amend is that section 6, not section 3 of HB 2006. So I don't even know if SB 847, the changes that they're recommending are applicable to that. But this letter doesn't really go into the needs of SB 847 either, so I think it's broad enough to address what you're trying to accomplish as far as getting safe parking.
So maybe like pull it up to a more general level, say like, hey, we know you're doing SB 847, can you allow for these things?
That or we ask for them to also specifically outline or amend section 6 of HB 2006 to basically state where it can be utilized, because that's the one section of HB 2006 where it doesn't say where it can be implemented in a county. And there's concerns from, I believe, CDD that you have to look at ORS 215 and the limitations there. If it's not expressly permitted in ORS 215, then it would not be allowed. And so maybe we either have some language stating that it is expressly allowed in certain zones. And I think that was what we tried to do in that other letter that we did to the state, where we wanted some definition as far as where it can be allowed.
That all sounded really good.
I can work with Kim
is that it?
to revise this.
Between the two of you, do you?
Yes, yeah, okay,
Thank you.
okay, sounds good.
So I'm kind of lost, but I mean,
So
just
we're
safe
revising.
parking is one thing, and maybe we want.
We want,
other
yeah,
options.
we're trying to ask for more than, being able to do more than just safe parking.
Does that mean,
In
are we
that
gonna,
near an environment.
are we gonna write a letter asking for SB 847 possible changes or not?
So we can ask for 847, we just need to have it include more amendments to HB 2006 than what they're proposing.
Because it's 847, I mean, is 847, is it amending 2006? Because 2006.
It is, but only
or
to that
is it-
section 3 of 2006. And the portion that's applicable to safe parking in 2006 is section 6. And that's what really needs to be amended.
So it doesn't say it here.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so we will update it.
So how broad do we want to go? Is it safe parking? Is it, because managed camping does go into safe parking.
The Gales property, I still haven't had a chance to meet it myself. But I mean, they are open to RV, parking a bunch of RVs. They're open to tiny shelters. They're even open to like people tenting there. So, outdoor shelter broadly, I would say, and in Central Oregon Villages, they have a, the outdoor shelter that they're setting up out on 27th. I mean, that they're using those pallet houses. Basically, so I mean, covering the whole gamut of those options. Good. Making it possible.
So do you support going down this path? I support the letter. In the future form, it sounds like it's coming together.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so we'll be supportive of the version.
Great.
have voted
I
on
would
it,
like to
that's what-
see it.
Yeah, so.
Yes.
We'll rework it and send it back around.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.
So there's that, first of all, I'm like, oh my goodness, oh yeah, no. No, we didn't, that was it, that was the real one. Oh, yeah, so.
Yeah, just